we're continuing on the brain that changes itself. There's a lot I want to do, so I wanted to I wanted to start quickly, start sooner. I think we are switching around. So astrology day is going to Monday. Tomorrow I want to talk about. I actually don't remember what it's called. I'm currently reading a chapter of the Routledge Handbook of Embodied Cognition, and one of the chapters is starting to talk about things in the same way that we talk about in the document. So it's quite exciting. I haven't even finished the chapter yet, but I know that we need to spend all day talking about it. So I'll read through that tomorrow. And I'm not sure what I'm going to embodied cognition chapter reading. It's more like inactive cognition. So I'll do that. I should let's be a little more professional here as I stumble through this. There we go. So that'll be tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'm off through the weekend. We're back for one last week of fun and then holiday break. Friday's a maybe. Maybe we move this to Thursday, the taking recommendations. But yeah, this isn't even going to be that anymore because I never ended up really working on that apart from the stream. So yeah, next week is kind of up in the air. Maybe astrology day takes a couple of days. We'll see. Well, let's get to it. So I think we were up to here. Right. Okay. And then we're just kind of flying through, finding our notes here. Monday maps show an opposite pattern. They didn't begin to change until 6 months into the training. Then they increased slowly and plateaued at 10 months. I don't know what we're talking about yet. Friday maps, Monday maps. Yo, what's good, Dharmadam? Good morning. We're doing mighty fine. We get to talk about fun sciencey stuff. What is there not to like there? Now, I was just saying that I found a chapter in this book that I've been reading on inactive cognition that is quite close to how I talk about things in the document. So I was kind of stoked that after all this time, I finally found someone who's talking about things in a similar way that I've been talking about it. And so I'm excited, and we could read through it. Funny enough, that chapter references Varela, right? Francisco Varela, is that it? Oops. Yeah. So I guess Varela was in that type of space as well. Nice, someone like-minded. Yeah. So for me, it's like I want to try to find, like, I want to follow the trail now. I want to see, okay, like, what are they referencing, and then perhaps see, like, okay, who else is using this as a reference, and then maybe we could just find who else is like in a more contemporary setting who's following these ideas. But yeah, The Brain That Changed Itself. This is neuroplasticity. This was a book all about how the brain changes itself, which is necessary for us to read for part 2 stuff, because everything we do in part 2 is effectively changing our brain in some way that is helping us pursue our goals. Reminds me of sometimes you like a guru and read his book, then go through the lineage of gurus and what they wrote. Yep. Yeah, you gotta find that out. Though I guess I'm kind of doing a weird thing where I want to go back just enough so that I could see what happens forward. Like, I want to see who else is using the same references that this chapter's using, so then I could see, like, you know, what are the updates? I want to know what's going on today. I want to know what people are talking about. Some of those references are from like early 2020 and 2017 and stuff like that. So I want to see what's happened in the last 5 years. Makes sense. Science. You go back far enough, and they're bloodletting and with leeches, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, like with more spiritual stuff, you can go back and you could find some of the fundamentals by going back. All right, so I don't know what we're talking about. The speed at which the subjects could read Braille correlated much better with the Monday maps, and though the changes on Mondays were never as dramatic as on Fridays, they were more stable. At the end of 10 months, the Braille students took 2 months off. When they returned, they were remapped, and their maps were unchanged from the last Monday mapping 2 months before. Thus, daily training led to dramatic short-term changes during the week, but over the weekends and months, more permanent changes were seen on Mondays. I don't remember what the I don't think I want to read all the build up for this, but let's see if it gives like a summary. Pasquale Leon believes that the differing results on Monday and Friday suggest differing plastic mechanisms. The fast Friday changes strengthen existing neuronal connections and unmask buried pathways. The slower, more permanent Monday changes suggest the formation of brand new structures, probably the sprouting of new neuronal connections and synapses. So I'm wondering what the variable was here. Was this like more frequent training of whatever they're doing here? More frequent training and seeing that? Or is this... It's got to be looking at the distance between the training days. But finished the book yesterday. Yo. Oh, I thought you were saying your book, called Quintessential Dzogchen, written by Sam Harris's teacher. Nice. How does it hold up? Or what did you think of it? Is it worthy of the Dzogchen name? All right, understanding this tortoise and hare effect can help us understand what we must do to truly master new skills. After a brief period of practice, as when we cram for a test, it is relatively easy to improve because we are likely strengthening existing synaptic connections. But we quickly forget what we've crammed, because these are easy come, easy go neuronal connections and are rapidly reversed. Maintaining improvement and making a skill permanent require the slow, steady work that probably forms new connections. If a learner thinks he is making no cumulative progress or feels his mind is like a sieve, he needs to keep at the skill until he gets the Monday effect, which in Braille readers took 6 months. The Friday-Monday difference is probably why some people, the tortoises, who seem slow to pick up a skill, may nevertheless learn it better than the hare friends. The quick studies, who won't necessarily hold on to what they have learned without the sustained practice that solidifies the learning. So I'm going to gank this. This is something we need to pay attention to later on. We need to learn about... I mean, I'm sure we're going to get this elsewhere. We're going to get the main takeaway here elsewhere from like specific skill acquisition resources. But I just want to make sure that I have this on hand so that I know to keep that in mind. It's a good book. Def helped me practice. Some specific advice for where I'm at with it, emphasizing looseness. I'm sorry. He kind of drilled a few points over and over, but from different angles, a lot of casual Tibetan term definitions thrown in that felt very confusing and all very similar. Haha. We'll definitely return to it. Very cool. Okay, so looseness. What is the concept of looseness here? Is this like in contrast to some sort of like groundedness, or is this in contrast to some sort of tightness, like something that's tightly coupled versus loosely coupled? All right, in 1904, he argued that thoughts repeated in mental practice must strengthen the existing neuronal connections and create new ones. He also had the intuition that this process would be particularly pronounced in neurons that control the fingers in pianists who do so much mental practice. Ramon E. Cajal, using his imagination, had painted a picture of a plastic brain but lacked the tools to prove it. Pascual Leon now thought he had a tool in TMS to test whether mental practice and imagination in fact lead to physical changes. The details of the imagining experiment were simple and picked up Cajal's idea to use the piano. Pascual Leon taught two groups of this is incredible. Taught two groups of people who had never studied piano a sequence of notes, showing them which fingers to move and letting them hear the notes as they were played. Then members of one group, the mental practice group, sat in front of an electric piano keyboard 2 hours a day for 5 days and imagined both playing the sequence and hearing it played. A second physical practice group actually played the music 2 hours a day for 5 days. Both groups had their brains mapped before the experiment, each day during it, and afterwards. Then, both groups were asked to play the sequence, and a computer measured the accuracy of their performances. Pascual Leon found that both groups learned to play the sequence, and both showed similar brain map changes. Remarkably, mental practice alone produced the same physical changes in the motor system as actually playing the piece. By the end of the 5th day, the changes in motor signals to the muscles were the same in both groups, and the imagining players were as accurate as the actual players were on their 3rd day. Okay, so it's slightly slower for them, right? Oh, no. Okay, this is saying in two different things. By the end of the 5th day, the changes to the muscles were same in both groups. This is a little ambiguous. The imagining players were as accurate as the actual players were on their 3rd day. So are they saying that after 5 days, the imagining players were as accurate as the other players were on the 3rd day, or were they both equal on the 3rd day? The level of improvement at 5 days in the mental practice group, however substantial, was not as great as those who did physical practice. But when the mental practice group finished its mental training and was given a single 2-hour physical practice session, its overall performance improved to the level of the physical practice group's performance at 5 days. Clearly, mental practice is an effective way to prepare for learning a physical skill with minimal physical practice. Just incredible. Okay. So they have a 4-stage thing, again, but different to Theravada. After you've had the experience, you basically want to repeat it and stabilize it, but there's all this nuance around not grasping at the experience or really doing anything with the mind. So the beginnings of stabilizing, the tendency to grasp at it is so strong and obstructive that you're told to be more relaxed and have a loose attitude around the non-dual experience. I see. There was some super trippy reasoning about how phenomena can be seen as beyond the concepts of arising and ceasing, because the place they arise from phenomenologically is totally undefinable and unfindable, and the same with ceasing, right? That's why I always think it's so funny when Sam Harris is like, and where do they go? Notice how thoughts disappear. Where do they go? Yeah, I'm getting to the point where it's like I'm trying to not force myself to really consider where different thoughts are appearing and like how I'm trying to not make it so that I force myself into thinking that they're all equal, and that they're I'm not trying to I'm trying to be as just observant as possible. Tulku taught him, nice. Emptiness is a broad thing, but these ideas are part of it. Right. Not that my knowledge is perfect. Yeah, no, very cool stuff. And a lot of fun, honestly. Um, I think it's always fun to just do something over a period of time and see how your experience changes. Okay. So I'm gonna write this down though, like the I'm sure we're gonna do this, find this elsewhere, but skill acquisition through mental versus physical practice. That'll come up again somewhere else. All right, one reason we can change our brains simply by imagining is that, from a neuroscientific point of view, imagining an act and doing it are not as different as they sound. When people close their eyes and visualize a simple object, such as the letter A, the primary visual cortex lights up, just as it would if the subjects were actually looking at the letter A. Brain scans show that in action and imagination, many of the same parts of the brain are activated. That is why visualizing can improve performance. So this is the idea of simulation. That when we're thinking certain things, that we're simulating certain other parts of our experience, whether that is some motor movement or some other aspect of thought or some emotional response. And so obviously this is all part of like that embodied cognition space. So this is like very similar to what embodied cognitivists talk about and point out. There's a lot of discussion about simulation and whatnot, and we are quite interested in that stuff. For sure, it's like learning a skill, fun to try and get good at skills, right? Right. It's just cool though. Yeah, I guess it's cool when it fundamentally changes your experience. I guess that's with all skills, but some skills are very niche. I mean, I guess if it takes over your life, like imagine an Olympian gymnast, like because gymnastics is so important for your life, the fact that you're gaining this skill over time is probably so important in your broader life that it would feel fundamental and profound. Yeah, no, I would say that's probably with all skills. So yeah, I probably don't want to privilege one over the other. All right, both groups exercised all right, in an experiment that is as hard to believe as it is simple. Doctors Yu and Cole showed that imagining one is using one's muscles actually strengthens them. The study looked at two groups, one that did physical exercise and one that imagined doing exercise. Both groups exercised a finger muscle, Monday through Friday, for 4 weeks. The physical group did trials of 15 maximal contractions with a 20-second rest between each. The mental group merely imagined doing 15 maximal contractions with a 20-second rest between each, while also imagining a voice shouting at them, harder, harder, harder. At the end of the study, the subjects who had done physical exercise increased their muscular strength by 30%, as one might expect. Those who only imagined doing the exercise for the same period increased their muscle strength by 22%. The explanation lies in the motor neurons of the brain that program movements. During these imaginary contractions, the neurons responsible for stringing together sequences of instructions for movements are activated and strengthened, resulting in increased strength when the muscles are contracted. This research has led to the development of the first machines that actually read people's thoughts. Thought translation machines tap into motor programs in a person or animal imagining an act, decode the distinctive electrical signature of the thought, and broadcast an electrical command to a device that puts the thought into action. These machines work because the brain is plastic and physically changes its state and structure as we think, in ways that can be tracked by electronic measurements. So these had to be pretty simple signals. But, moving your arm in a certain way or moving a finger up or down, like grasping, these are simple enough. Like these are much more simple than a thought about a concept. So Yeah, this is how we're able to start doing this stuff. And this book came out in 2007, so you can only imagine that the technology around that has improved. I'll tell you, I've done a good amount of LSD, and the peak meditations have a totally different character, but equally far from a baseline experience. Nice. Traditional in Yoga Nidra is to visualize yourself doing yoga poses. When I wanted to get better at yoga, I did it a lot. Yeah, I should have done that. I never even considered doing that. I don't think I visualized myself much at all, other than when I was. Yeah, it was less about visualizing myself. It was more about when I was in those poses, mentally like keeping track of my groundedness. But I probably could have benefited from another perspective of visualization. Okay, right. These devices are currently being developed to permit people who are completely paralyzed to move objects with their thoughts. As the machines become more sophisticated, they may be developed into thought readers, which recognize and translate the content of a thought and have a potential to be far more probing than lie detectors, which can only detect stress levels when a person is lying. Yeah, my understanding is that it's just quite difficult to find more nuanced signals, such as reading people's thoughts. So much so that currently the science has not completely taken off with regard to neural correlates related to conceptual thought. Granted, there are certainly some popping up here and there, and I want to try to find them. But until we get I guess better tech for actually reading, and then like reading data, and then leveraging more sophisticated machine learning, we probably won't be able to figure that out. But I think we will soon. During the yoga, okay, so in the hypnagogic state, hypnagogic, the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, characterized by drowsiness, strange sensory experiences like vivid images or sounds, and physical sensations, often harmless but sometimes linked to sleep disorders like narcolepsy, involving dreamlike intrusions as you drift off. I think there's no way concepts are mapped the same between people. That's true to some extent. There would be some sort of similarity between people who have similar experiences of that concept. And the question is, at what level of abstraction are we talking about? Whereas they did find similarities, I believe, when they had people looking at bird tails. The book that I've been reading points out that people who are right-handed will internalize certain information related to what they would do with that hand differently than people who are left-handed. And they also showed that it's not necessarily static. Like if the person who was right-handed loses their right hand, after a week of using their left hand, they would start thinking in that same way. But I don't know if those are good examples, because they're not talking about the high level cortical conceptual thought that I think we want to find. When we both see a picture of Robin Williams, do the same circuits light up? Maybe the concept of pain, for example, is the same. Right, I think certain. So this is why schema theory is really helpful for us. This is what we use when we first start conceptualizing our understanding. Like, what are the contents of our understanding? Schema theory provides a nice way of bridging that gap. So we can theorize different schemas as connecting specific parts of the brain to specific concepts, and that these would be activated when you thought about these concepts. And I mean, schemas, this is like, we could talk about schemas at any level of abstraction. So perhaps when you see Robin Williams, you know, some abstraction for man is activated, and that would be somewhat similar between a bunch of people. Like it's a very like high level abstraction. But then all the thoughts that people have about Robin Williams, whether they liked him or not, or whether they thought he was funny or not, like there's so many nuances between what we actually think about these things. And so you know, we could draw this to like the discussion, like a pen. We probably all have very similar things in common to the pen, even though we do like, you know, our brains look different, and the actual things that are getting lit up in our brain when we see a pen is literally different. Like it's not going to be the same exact shape, geometric shape of what's getting activated. However, we could probably find patterns that are similar, like very similar. Whereas when we're thinking about a topic like I don't know, just imagine just some like really in the weeds topic, chances are we have very different internalizations of it. There's all this personalized construction going on. I don't know how you would penetrate it. Right. Yeah. It's like machine learning is going to find the similarities. That's all it's going to be able to do. And the question is, how do we then make sense of the similarities? Like, what do we, and we're only going to be able to make sense of the similarities in like a behaviorism type of way. Like we're going to have to consider, okay, we found all these similarities. What specifically is making this part of the brain activate? And then we could do a bunch of experiments around that to figure out, to really hone in on like, okay, what's the intuitive thing that we're trying to actually get at with this thing that seems to light up when all these people are looking at this one thing. Like you would, you know, if we find out, okay, maybe this part of the brain is associated with identifying a man, then let's show other pictures of men and see, and then let's show pictures of women and see like if that type of thing holds up. And so yeah, it's got to be a not a minefield, but like it's got to be a needle in a haystack. That's not a great one. I mean, it's just got to be an absolute maze for these scientists to find something that's remotely significant. But they do. So thank goodness for that. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We got what these imaginary experiments show is how truly integrated imagination and action are, despite the fact that we tend to think of imagination and action as completely different and subject to different rules. But consider this. In some cases, the faster you can imagine something, the faster you can do it. This person has done different versions of a simple experiment. When you time how long it takes you to imagine writing your name with your good hand and then actually write it, the times will be similar. When you imagine writing your name with your non-dominant hand, it will take longer both to imagine it and to write it. Most people who are right-handed find that their mental left hand is slower than their mental right hand. Right? We just can't visualize that. I don't know if that's actually I don't know if that holds up as like a phenomenal example there, because there's a lot going on in trying to imagine something that you haven't seen before. I don't know if it's because you're trying to actually like mentally do it. It could just be a stimuli visualization type thing where we're just unable to get that into our brains as quickly. Okay, what are we? Plasticina, he tells me, is the musical Spanish word for plasticity, and it captures something the English word does not. In Spanish, it's also the word for Play-Doh or plasticine, and describes a substance that is fundamentally impressionable. For him, our brains are so plastic that even when we do the same behavior day after day, the neuronal connections responsible are slightly different each time because of what we have done in the intervening time. Right, so this is the thing I'm trying to get at in part one. That like we have to keep in mind how dynamic our brains are And since our brains, these are the very connections that are activated when we're trying to experience the world, not trying to experience, when we do experience the world, when we experience meaning, that means even though it feels like we're seeing the same thing every single time, there must be some difference in this experience, given the fact that there's different neurons being fired with different connection strengths and whatnot. But the real point is to realize like that doesn't feel different. And so what does that mean about the feeling of that experience? Like what like let's now decouple the feeling of certainty that we have from what we might consider to be the contents of the concept of a pen. And I mean, we can't decouple it. That's the point. But we have to point out that there's both of these things happening at the same time. And so we can decouple them conceptually, where we can see how perhaps there's just a part of our brain that is signaling salience and signaling expectation and breaking expectation. This is all predictive processing stuff, and that's like a very abstract process in our brain. Like that happens regardless of whether we're looking at our the work we do during the day or the people that we talk with at night. Like this is a fundamental part of our brains. And we can decouple that from the very different concepts that we deal with all day. So, yeah, it seems like our affective processes are fundamental for our experience, and that has like in my mind, that has implications towards how we can think about ontology and how like the meaning that we experience, the meaning we understand. All right. Hello, Energy Domter, what's good? Am I willing to react to a short video related to consciousness on stream? I guess it depends how short, because we did just go through a ton of consciousness stuff. But I will indulge.
Imagine being able
46 seconds. That's well within our
think that
12 minutes. Okay. Intelligence exists in platonic space. We just download it. All right. I might cut this off very quickly, just based on what it's about, but we'll see, because we spent a lot of time in consciousness land, and unless this thing is like giving us something useful, then I think we're gonna have to cut it. Sarvapriyananda and Bernardo did an event together recently. Is that who we're looking at right now? Or no, this is Levin. Okay, yeah, I've seen this name before. That what was the? It's long. I haven't watched it. All right. You've probably mentioned the name Sarva. Oh no, okay, that's two names, right? There's supposed to be a space in there, or am I going crazy? I feel like we've said Priyananda before, but maybe that's all one name, and I'm just terrible with names. But yeah, I don't know if we can really take much time with stuff that Bernardo's touching. I don't know if it's going to be. I don't know if that's useful for us at all. Swami, okay. No, it's literally Sarva. Okay, do I recognize this person? Energy Domter, we are definitely going to watch that in a second. Oh, okay. No, we've seen this guy. We've seen this guy recently. I forget why. I forget what we were doing. But I don't think we can watch something with Bernardo here at this point. What is the purpose of life if I am that? Okay.
The Platonic view is more correct, and I know this is not how most biologists think about things. I think that in the exact same way that mathematicians that are sympathetic to the Platonic worldview, this idea that there are, in fact, in some way, there is a separate world in which various rules of number theory and various facts of mathematics and various properties of computation and things like that, right? That there's a separate space where these things live. And importantly, the idea is that, they think that we discover those things. We don't invent them or create them. We discover them, that and that they would be true still if all the facts of the physical universe were different. They would still, be true, right? I extend that idea in a couple of ways. One is I think that what exists in that Platonic space is not just rules of mathematics and things like that, which are in a certain sense low agency kind of objects because they just sort of sit there doing, they don't do much. I actually think that there's a spectrum of that, and some of the components of that Platonic space have much higher agency. I think it's a space of minds as well, and of different ways to be intelligent. And I think that just like when you make certain devices, you suddenly harness the rules of computation, rules of mathematics that are basically free lunches. There are so many things you.
All right. Yeah, unfortunately, we can't follow this. I mean, you could go down this line, but you're really just conceptualizing these intuitions that you have. I like that. That's pretty much it. You're just kind of conceptualizing things that feel intuitive, right? Like you can recognize these patterns, and you remember this experience of certainty that I'm talking about makes it feel like things are objective externally in a Platonic way. Now we leverage. Fortunately, I got caught by Hegel, or I should say Brandom, pointing out how we can think about the very notion of objectivity without having a gap between our experience and what things actually are. It's really that for Hegel it's actually kind of for Brandom and Hegel they wouldn't agree with this, but for me the objectivity is a quality of our experience that we can make sense of now as a quality of our experience. It's that feeling of certainty. It's the feeling of that thing being separate from us and being objective. That really is fundamental. We're trying to find the most fundamental part here. And the discussion that Levin was having there, we're already outside of the fundamental discussion. Like Bernardo actually has a better grounding, I think, than that guy. Because Bernardo at least can point out that fundamentally we are experiencing the world, and so Bernardo is going to make a case about how these things external are actually sourced by our experience in some way. I think that's what if I recall that correctly. I could be wrong about the nuances of it, but long name. That being God, Tat Fiam Asi. You don't like Bernardo's ideas, or you're on another topic? No, I think in general, I think we're past Bernardo's ideas. I know that sounds so terrible. It sounds so demeaning. I appreciated our day of diving into Bernardo, but we can't it's that we'd get bogged down by Bernardo's stance. I think we've already perhaps I haven't vocalized it effectively enough, but I think logically we've moved past it. I think with the most recent consciousness video, I think I put out the argument actually quite. I do specifically call out Bernardo. I call out analytic idealism in the video, the most recent video. And I think I make a decent argument for it. That said, in that last video, the one mistake I make is by using the terminology, the label physicalism, when really we're not trying to purport physicalism. We're trying to purport some sort of pragmatism. Because, given our discussion, how our conceptual understandings are constantly changing, what does that mean for the meaning that we're talking about? We have to now have a view of what we're actually talking about when we're talking about meaning and truth and understanding and all these things. And that's what the document does. It tries to find the most fundamental telling. How can we make sense of what we understand and experience in like a most fundamental way. And yeah. So it's not that like the fact that we have such a high fidelity understanding of the physical world doesn't mean that the physical world is true in some ontological sense that trumps our thoughts about it. Really, like the meaning is something we experience. That's where Bernardo and I would agree. That all meaning is experienced. It's coming from consciousness. So how do we like rectify that with our understanding of a physical world? Like, we're never actually experiencing the physical world. All we have is the feeling of certainty that we feel when we think about this thing. My understanding of the physical world, it was learned. It's not like I earned the view of the physical world. It's that I have internalized habitual ways of thinking about this concept of the physical world that seems to be shared amongst a lot of people, seems to be shared amongst the textbook. I mean, in many ways it isn't, because I'm, obviously I don't know everything about the physical world. I only know a very small fraction. But yeah, my understanding of as we talked about, when we have these I find myself here with a conceptual understanding about many different things. So what do I prioritize? What aspects of my conceptual understanding do I prioritize? And Bernardo would argue that you should prioritize what feels the most true in some sense, right? It's the one thing that we know to be certain of is that we are conscious, and that consciousness is this one thing. And I'm pointing out that, hey, once again, that's just something we're feeling certain about. Just because we feel certain about it doesn't mean it's true. It's similarly just something that we find in our conceptual understanding, which is also contingent. Like, we learned about consciousness, like our understanding of consciousness is very much shaped by what people have told us, what we've learned, what we've internalized in the past. So yeah, the heuristic that I call for is, we need a heuristic that points to how we can navigate effectively what arises in our experience. So what's empirical in like a very fundamental way. So like, I can imagine that being mindful, I'm seeing like thoughts are arising and whatnot. Like that's empirical in some sense. So how do if all thoughts are appearing in consciousness, how do we navigate these thoughts? Like, how do I navigate what parts of my conceptual experience and understanding is right versus wrong, and what that would mean? And I arrive at the one thing that seems given, like, according to my current understanding. So it's like, hey, I'm calling on other people to just kind of have a similar understanding, and maybe you don't. But in my understanding, the thing that's helped humans across history to get a much better understanding of what can be predictable empirically is the scientific method. Now, that's not the physical world, right? That's not our understanding of the physical world. What I know about the physical world, or the concept of the physical world, is that people have been wrong about the physical world over and over and over again for a long period of time. But what seems to allow people to come up with more clear understandings of things, including the physical world, is a process. It's a heuristic for what ought to be right or wrong, or logical, or rational, or sufficiently justified, right? So that's all we have, and with that in mind, that's I guess where we're at. Analytic idealism doesn't hold up because I understand the empirical method or the scientific method to point us to an understanding of our own conscious thoughts as arising from these dynamic neural architectures. Thus, even my understanding of consciousness being fundamental is similarly an illusion, or not an illusion, but it's similarly just contingent. I'm not going to argue that everything that appears in my mind is an illusion. Even though you can take that argument, like you can have that perspective. It's just that perspective isn't salient for a lot of people. So, sorry, I thought that was necessary for myself to just get it all out, just so I can keep it in mind for longer. It's kind of I wanted to exercise that muscle, even though I didn't obviously do that the most gracefully. Okay, I haven't heard much of him, to be honest. Just that Swami likes him. Haha. How do you know if you agree with him if you haven't heard his arguments? I have heard his argument. We spent a whole day doing a real deep dive. We spent 2 days, right? It was long enough that we had to spend the second day, and then after that, we even ran into his ideas in a couple of accounts, including the Consciousness Atlas. I believe he's got his own space here. I forget where it is, though. I forget what type of... There we go. Look at that. Yeah. Consciousness-only ontology asserting that phenomenal consciousness is fundamental, right? So this is the thing I just assaulted. The singular primitive of reality. Everything else in nature, including the physical world and individual minds, is grounded in patterns of excitation or expressions of this spatially unbound cosmic consciousness. Right. So I think that there's been an error in the lead up to coming away with this type of conclusion. I just don't think I'm allowed to agree with this. Okay. Bro, is analytic idealism a real thing that other people do, or is it just him? That's a good question. I don't know how large it is, but he's a big, like, anytime there's a content creator that has a large audience like that, like, you have to expect that he's indoctrinating to some extent. Self-branding, I guess it needs a name. I think he did brand it himself. I mean, I guess that's how it always happens. I was referring to the ideas of Michael Levin, and I was not referring to the ideas of Bernardo Kastrup in my comment. Oh, okay, my bad. How do I know if I agree with him if I haven't heard his argument? It's tricky. It's like, what would be a good example of this? I don't know. Imagine I walk over to the sink and I fill this thing up with water, and then I close the thing on it, and then I go and I taste it. I taste that it's water, and then someone comes up to me and he says, "Hey, that bottle right now is filled with wine." Like, I don't need to hear his argument for why that bottle is now filled with wine. I know I know it's already wrong. This is a terrible thing. But yeah, like the argument that he's making requires assaulting like significant things that I know are are false, and so, or either false or like inappropriate. Yeah, I don't know how else to. Like, at some point you can just let go of, like, I could spend a lot of time really making the argument as to why, even from what we just watched, that small bit, that I know for a fact that argument won't make sense. But yeah, no, there is also something very inappropriate about me just not listening to the argument. I guess there's a little bit of a calculation I'm making in my own mind of, like, is this worth it? There's risk here, and then there's a potential gain, right? There's the small chance, because I don't know anything to be absolutely certain, right? That's the whole idea here. I can only use standards like heuristics to guide me, and reasons and logic is part of those heuristics. So if there is a small chance that this person would, that Levin would be able to wow me, to just absolutely demolish what I think to be true, and Like that's in the cards, but I just doubt it. It's more of like a, it's a hunch, a hunch that that's not going to be the case. But it's more so a hunch that it wouldn't be worth our time to like do a deep dive into those arguments, because we just have to do so much stuff. There's and yeah, I'm kind of on the consciousness stuff. We have to be judicious with our time. All right, I imagine Pascual Leon says that the brain activity is like Play-Doh. One is playing with all the time. Everything that we do shapes this chunk of Play-Doh, but he adds, if you start out with a package of Play-Doh that is a square and you then make a ball out of it, it is possible to get back to a square, but it won't be the same square as you had to begin with. Outcomes that appear similar are not identical. The molecules in the new square are arranged differently than in the old one. In other words, similar behaviors performed at different times use different circuits. For him, even when a patient and we have to think about behaviors as encompassing thoughts as well. Like imagine that's just parts of the brain behaving. That's what's creating your thought. So that's the that's the fundamental. All right, I keep losing my spot because I click. That's the fundamental takeaway when we're talking about these types of things. Similar behaviors performed at different times use different circuits. For him, even when a patient with a neurological or psychological problem is cured, that cure never returns the patient's brain to its pre-existing state. The system is plastic, not elastic, Pascual Leon says in a booming voice. An elastic band can be stretched, but it always reverts to its former shape, and the molecules are not rearranged in the process. The plastic brain is perpetually altered by every encounter, every interaction. So the question becomes, if the brain is so easily altered, how are we protected from endless change? Indeed, if the brain is like Play-Doh, how is it that we remain ourselves? Our genes help give us consistency up to a point, and so does repetition. Pascual Leon explains this with a metaphor. The plastic brain is like a snowy hill in winter. Aspects of that hill, the slope, the rocks, the consistency of the snow, are like our genes, a given. When we slide down on a sled, we can steer it and we'll end up at the bottom of the hill by following a path determined both by how we steer and the characteristics of the hill. Where exactly we will end up is hard to predict because there is so many factors in play. So this is actually a great connection back to our discussion of this month of like individual differences and how that affects where we go. Now, granted, when we're talking about individual differences, some aspects of this hill are very different between people, and it's not like we can all end up in the same spot. As I mentioned earlier this month, I probably won't become a pop star, even if I wanted to. The entirety of Kastrup's argument hinges on his linguistics. Right? What is poppin', Onion Helmet? Like with all these discussions, even with Levin, I'm sure that semantics has such an important role. So I like one of my heuristics now with philosophers in general is that any philosopher who cannot recognize or acknowledge that their own semantics are contingent, and that what they are doing by applying words is I guess communicating in some sense, where other people are going to infer different things from their words. Therefore, they're trying to say it in a way that makes sense for other people. Like if the philosopher doesn't understand all these things, then like that's a huge flag. That's a huge red flag, and we have to be careful about what they purport to be true, because when they talk about truth, they mean truth as in like the ontological truth of the world. And what I'm trying to do is talk about how we can understand things in certain ways. And when I say that, I mean like literally like we can, like, I know it's possible, like I understand it to be a certain way, but also can, like, we're allowed to understand it in a certain way given the other concepts we understand. Like, imagine, this is very Hegelian. Imagine concepts stand as rules for how other concepts can be used, and the concept itself. Like, our understanding of a category sets up rules for how we can understand individuals of that category, right? The universal. That was the whole universal particulars discussion. So I forget what I was talking about in the beginning here, but many things are quite simple. Can reality really be described? Reality can be described in many different ways. That's the point. It can never be described in a way that is like the way to describe reality, but it can be described in many different ways. And many of those ways can feel intuitive and feel certain and feel compelling to other people. Aren't all concepts an enclosed system? What do we mean by enclosed? So this is where Hegel's notion of determinant is really cool. Like, he points out that concepts are determined, right? Like, there's always this process of experience that determines concepts. And what is actually determining the concepts are its bounds. And the bounds are relations. So like, these are determinate relations. So this is the determinate relations of... yeah, let me find this. We got to go... No, we got to go actually part 1. All right, so this is all conceptualizing. This is... yeah, determinate relations of incompatibility and consequence. Like, for Hegel, these categories... these relations are actually setting the bounds. Like, this is enclosing the system. But, we can imagine that these relations, like, we can only conceptualize these relations, and we could try to imagine all the relations, but we're never gonna be able to think about all the relations. So they're theoretically enclosed, right? A cat is a cat is an animal. Like, that relation constitutes both the cat and the animal, the concept of the cat and the concept of the animal. Because of that relationship connecting both of them, that's affecting their determinate edges in some sense. And you can imagine that a single concept, like a writing utensil, a pen, is connected to so many other different concepts, and that's affecting the bounds of what a pen is. This is all theoretical, though. Like, it's not like these relations actually exist. This is an exercise in making sense of the contents of our understanding. And the big point that we try to make here is the dynamic nature of these concepts. So the very bounds, even if they're enclosed in the sense that they're determinate, that it has these determinate edges, these bounds are constantly shifting. They're changing relations with different things. You're discovering new relations. Yeah, like, even if they're enclosed by form, that doesn't mean that they're like static in some way. All right, I believe if you're interested in different conceptualizations of cognitive development, you might be interested in the ideas of Andreas Demetriou related to cognitive development. All right, I might write this down for necessary research for... where would we put this? I'll just put it in part 1 here. Concepts can only be defined by other concepts. No, that's the big thing with the relations. It's like concepts become defined by their connections to other concepts. But once again, this is theoretical. Like, the sentence that concepts can only be defined by other concepts isn't some truism about the world objectively. It's something that we both agree upon, given what we understand. Like given our conceptual understandings, that sentence is not only allowed, but it is necessary. That's why, we can. That's the nice thing about always connecting this stuff back to necessity, possibility, and impossibility. What we can say, what we must say, what we cannot say. We could think about this as incompatibility or consequence. Given this one thing that we say, therefore this other thing cannot be said, or this other thing must be said. Can you give an example? The dictionary, but aren't you assuming a thing called a cat exists and then making it a concept and referencing other concepts? Right, at the end of the day, like all that concepts are, like, most fundamentally are recognition. Like it's just pattern recognition, whether the stimulus is seeing something or it's thinking about a specific a specific word or a specific thing, and like who knows what that actual prompt is, right? It's like some aspect of our thought is making us feel this, that we're thinking about something that's enclosed, and then we have that experience, and that experience isn't simple. It's very much embodied and holistic. So yeah, once again, concepts, the idea of a concept is very elusive. It's almost unintelligible to like imagine what a singular concept is in our experience. Like we're only given an experience that has concepts connected to each other, concepts that already exist. That was the nice thing about starting out with a Heideggerian discussion of meaning, experience in the moment, the experience of meaning. The world already arrives already intelligible and significant, filled with things that matter to us in ways that are often immediate and intuitive. So the cat already exists here. It's like, we do have this problem where like we start with the cat existing, but that's just an aspect of how our brain works, how we experience what the contents of the world. So there's no getting around that. Like it's very difficult to like explain our understanding or our experience. That's what I think is the challenge, and also the value of part one. I'll just say, like, I think we did a decent job of like being able to talk about all these things. Now it's a lot of stuff here, so it's, obviously there's probably a ton wrong with it. And I just did the read through I didn't edit it yet because I'm not daunting it. What would be the word? Dreading it. I'm dreading it. I just did the read through of Experience Over Time, and there's so many, like, to your point, and thank you for bringing up the AI language patterns, Darmadon, but there are a lot of superfluous language in this major section. A lot of just unnecessary lists. Yeah, we can cut it down. Fortunately, that doesn't actually make the actual content worse off. So like, fortunately, it's not an issue with like the substance. It's an issue with the form. and so over time, we're going to have to chisel that down. And then hopefully it's slightly longer. I'm sorry, slightly shorter. Okay. Right. Ultimately, the cat doesn't exist. Like the fact that I think that a cat exists is contingent on my understanding. I internalized that stuff when I was a kid, or I think about cats every once in a while. We watch that one cat YouTube channel that I really like. If we had no word for animal, would the concept of cats still exist? It would be difficult to have no word for animal and still have a concept for animal, right? Like, what would that even mean? So if we didn't have a concept for an animal, then it would be difficult to consider whether we'd have a similar concept about cats, right? We'd have to, like, we can only imagine what we would think a cat is if we didn't understand the concept of an animal. And it would have to be something angelic, like it would have to be something crazy. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what, or we would just think it's fake, right? So yeah, like that's only a thought experiment that we could try to play at. I think the concept of cat is purely a mental thing, right? I agree. Patterns among other concepts, no, enclosed. Yeah, I mean, all these things are mental, right? I'm trying to point out that we're getting away from that Platonic view where a cat is a thing that's separate. the really important thing when we're starting to talk about the physical world, and one of the reasons why we can make sense of the physical world in a way that really makes sense with the rest of our conceptual experience, is given that we learn based on stimuli, whether that is external stimuli or internal stimuli, whether that is the brute non-living physical world, or if that's the living social humans within it. Like, these things are constraints that affect what we it affects the trajectory of what we believe to be true. Like, it affects our learning. Like, regardless of what I think about a cliff, if I try walking off that cliff, I will die. So the people that, you know, on one hand, we could think about it in a in a Darwinian way, where certain types of thoughts do just get you killed. And then also we could think about it in a way where, like, regardless of what I think about what should be allowed in a social encounter, if I go into a social group and I try that and they don't like it, then that's going to end up negatively affecting my experience in such a way that, remember, the experience isn't the main thing that's happening, or isn't the only thing that's happening, but also, the trajectory of my learning is happening in tandem with this experience, this unpleasant experience. So I will probably, get some trauma, or maybe hopefully internalize that I shouldn't do that in the future, right? Like, this is affecting how I learn about what is true. Like, what I remember, like, we try to make what is semantically true and what is normative, like, hand in hand here. Like, we end up thinking that it's semantic, but really what's going on is we're being conditioned to think certain things. That's why, like, when I always point out, when we're young, like, our teachers or our parents will point at something and tell us what it is, and they're really telling us a rule, like, this is, like, when you see this, that's what this thing is. That, like, right there, that is the letter A. When you see that is the letter A. That's a rule. It's not like it's not like they're giving you what's true, and like, you're putting a true fact into your brain now. Like, they could have said that any letter was the letter A, and you would have believed them, and that would have like, significantly affected your understanding going forward. So, yeah, we have to, unfortunately, think about all this stuff. This is very difficult stuff, given that it's so unintuitive, and that's what we're up against. Because, yeah, like, what Bernardo Kastrup has on his side is that his philosophy is so damn intuitive, which is really, really effective. We do not have an intuitive philosophy on our side here, except for when we start looking at the science. When you start looking at the science and you have some conceptual understanding of the value and or authority of science, then that can lead you to an understanding that makes sense of the very paradox of how our own thoughts are making sense of the science that's telling us how our own thoughts are changing. So, changing and arising. Okay, if we called all animals animal, would the concept of individual animals still exist? Yes, because once again, the concept isn't. Not once again. I didn't say this yet, but I'm saying once again as if we all just read the document right now. But like, the concept of, like, when we're talking about concepts, we're not just talking about the words, like, or even the explicit meaning that arises when we think about something. Like, we're talking about all the aspects of our experience, even the stuff that's unconscious. So if we called all animals animals, we would still consider that the concept of an individual animal includes some sort of stimulus that allows you to distinguish between the two, and not just the stimulus, but, like, also the feeling that you get when you see it. So you would still have a different feeling when you saw a cute dog than when you saw a bear out in the woods. Like, you would still have a different experience. And, once again, concepts, this is like a theoretical way we can conceptualize our experience and our understanding. You would end up having a different understanding and experience of that bear than the cute dog. So that's Yeah, we're just leveraging this idea of concept. One, because it's quite intuitive. Two, because we get to leverage all the cool stuff from Hegel land. And yeah, but it's not like concepts are this thing that exists. It's just it's a pragmatic linguistic tool that we can leverage. All right, we're a bit confused by what you mean, but again, the concept of individual animals, I would say, is purely mental and exists to the extent that it exists mentally, right? I just think they're interesting questions about linguistic definitions. There isn't any particular significance. Okay, I forget how we got on this, but I agree you can always derail a conversation by saying the concept you're saying don't exist. True. I've been thoroughly stun-locked. But I think we've been stun-locked by Pascual Leon, honestly. I normally don't whip it out. Plato, to me, is the most wrong about concepts. I remember a street interview where the interviewer asked someone what 2 + 2 was, and he said that doesn't exist. It's not a number. So yeah, like, we could think about this stuff pragmatically. For someone to say that, like, they're doing something inappropriate, in, like, not in like a true sense, but just in like a very intuitive, like, why are you playing by a different set of rules right now? Like when same with the best example I always try to bring up is, like, when we're talking about base level philosophy, then we have to point out that truth is this very dynamic thing that's very personal and subjective for each person, and we can only make sense of the truth that we feel like is true, like a objective truth about the physical world and whatnot, when we consider that each of us have affect the understanding of each other, and in such a way that we arrive at these pragmatically similar understandings. And obviously there's a lot of stuff going on here where different levels of authority, or, you know, like a textbook has, you know, some sway over what a teacher is going to think, and how the teacher is going to then tell the student whether or not they're wrong or not, or give them points, and the kid wants points because the parents are going to be upset if the kid doesn't get the points. You know, there's a lot of constraints, like, on us that's affecting what we believe. And yeah, so back to what I was saying is, if we're out in an academic setting, I'm not going to act as if truth is some subjective dynamic thing. I'm going to talk about truth as the way that they understand truth. That's the pragmatic aspect of communication. Like, when we're talking to people that we know have a certain understanding, we might as well leverage that understanding and abide by it, even if we have some, like, other understanding. Like, at some point, who cares about the semantics? What we're trying to convey is just some information. And it's not like I'm going to die on a hill that anyone ought to use a word in a certain way in every single concept or every single context. In exalting them, I think that's what he did. I forget. I don't know the West that well. Sometimes meditators will whip out that things don't exist as a way of dismissing them, and they omit that they mean that it doesn't exist to the extent that nothing exists. Right. So like, what they mean. So yeah, this is the other thing that we have to be really mindful of, and this is something that we're in a very nice way we're able to really stress, because of the type of philosophy we're talking about. Is when we say things, that is going to be inferred by many different people, and what we say might be ambiguous. And in fact, like, what we say is always going to be ambiguous to some extent, because people have different understandings. So they're going to understand what we say in different ways. Even when I talk about a cat, we're all getting a slightly different understanding or experience of what I'm saying there. So what we can do to really hedge our bets in some sense when we're trying to communicate is to be as precise as we think we need to be, given the group that we're with. And that's going to be a challenge for me, because, you know, in theory, the viewership here could be as varied as can be. So I really need to be mindful of that. I need to try to make sure that I explain things in ways that anyone can follow, and not just someone who's versed in analytic idealism or certain facets of science. And I probably fail every single day, but you know, when like when you're in a certain setting, you want to not you want to, but you can pay attention to what they might know and how you would, like, given the goal of trying to communicate a certain thing, what ought you, how precise ought you say what you're trying to say, such that you reduce the risk of other people taking away with it a different intention or meaning than you intended. All right, what do you think is the primary goal of philosophy? I think it's making sense of the world. I think that's literally it, making sense. It's just trying to, and when I say that, I don't mean like in a sense of like, let's try to box everything into specific categories. I mean, literally, we're trying to feel a certain way. We're trying to feel like we understand what's going on. It's like, just imagine the base human condition of predictive processing. We're trying to get to that order. We're trying to go from the chaos to the order here. And once we find order, you know, we go out into more chaos and try to make more order from that. Heidegger pointed this out as the existential characteristic of curiosity. How we're just always on to that next thing. But yeah, like, if, you know, different. I wouldn't. Once again, I wouldn't say that there is like a primary goal in some like static truth sense. I just think that what philosophers are doing, like at a fundamental level, is trying to make sense. Like I think that's like that's a justifiable way we can think about it, right? This is just one way we can think about what the goal of philosophy. It's trying to make sense of what we're experiencing, make sense of the world, make sense of our emotions, make sense of our lives. I think that's what philosophers are doing, which is why I see, like, when there's like an analytic philosopher that goes real deep into the weeds of this one semantic rule set, I'm like wondering, like, okay, what benefit are we getting here? Like, you're indulging yourself here and no one else is able to like this is a very selfish philosophy you've got, I could say. All right, out of the following: truth/knowledge, understanding, wisdom, happiness, goodness, justice. Don't think about it too much. Just say something. You can't say all of them. Okay, so I didn't even look at your options before I said it. I think all of those are in, like, all of those encapsulate or are wrapped in what I mean by saying, like, making sense. Like, we're trying to regulate our emotions. We're trying to regulate our emotions by coming up with patterns of thought that feel good, that don't feel bad. And those patterns of thought include topics such as goodness and justice, and obviously, like, happiness, you know, with regard to ourselves and others. Like, one thing that we point out in the epilogue is that we can ground the story of wisdom in the immediate practical challenges of survival, specifically looking at the two primary theaters of action where humanity always operated: the physical and the social. And the social, you know, is somewhat physical as well in an empirical sense. I guess both of them are experienced. They're both just stimuli, whether that's photons or like literal feeling, like touch. The physical world was a domain of direct high-stakes prediction error. A tool either worked or it shattered. A plant was either nourishing or sickening. Yeah, once again, like, we're like, when philosophers of the last 2,000 years are operating, I should say like 4,000 years, they're operating with the evolutionary product of this story. It's all regulation, it's all homeostasis, it's all like means for our body to survive going into the future. A tool either worked or it shattered. A plant was either nourishing or sickening. Survival itself depended on creating and transmitting reliable, practical knowledge about the tangible world. And this would be like the, I should really say the empirical world here. Simultaneously, survival depended on group cohesion. Individuals had to learn the rules that led to social harmony and avoid the pain of ostracism. Right? And the stakes were so high socially back then. You know, like, we are so relatively wealthy today that you can be ostracized from some community and still be fine. Unless, of course, like, you know, you're in a situation where you're being ostracized from your, like, own family, and that is your means of, like, straight up survival, like, of nutrients and whatnot. Then you have a real problem on your hands. And, yeah, I mean, you know, we could get into the discussion about antisocial behavior and homelessness, and that, you know, that's just that's a bummer of a topic. But people came to understand wisdom about the world and themselves through action. Early peoples discovered that what worked by trying things, and they discovered social norms by bumping up against them. So yeah, this is how we learn, by bumping up against them. Is like the story of neuroplasticity in some sense. Actually, no, it's really the story of predictive processing, but, you know, predictive process, like, neuroplasticity is actually a more fundamental topic, in the sense that for children, you don't need to necessarily put your attention on the things that affect your learning. You know, children will just kind of absorb stuff. But for adults, you need the attention. And what gives you the attention a lot of the time is the emotions of bumping up against something. Like the prediction error is what drives the bottom up change in attention that then leads to changes in your understanding. Okay, so if you could just pick a single word or phrase that isn't in the list to describe what the goal of philosophy is, it'd be making sense. I'm starting to look like a Sam Harris fanatic, which is a bummer, because making sense for Sam Harris isn't about this like this fundamental of a philosophical topic. For him, making sense is more of a higher level topic about, I think, culture and what we ought to do, which is not what I'm trying to do here. But yeah, it would be making sense, honestly. I mean, really, if I were to give the more fundamental word, it would be something like homeostasis or autopoiesis or allostasis. But it depends what level of abstraction we're trying to talk about. All right, we got to get past this block of blue. Point of philosophy is think, think, think. Oh, I like that. Think, think. Ooh, no, think, think. Yep. I mean, that's the condition of human life right now. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but fortunately and unfortunately, depending how you look at it. There's no not thinking. Even, like I could say, even the most mastered yogis need to tell you what the answer is, right? And that requires a thought. Now, yeah, have there been yogis that have literally lost their, like, they've just gone into a state of no return? I remember Osho said something almost exactly like that. Nice. You hear a philosophy, you like it or you don't like it, nothing changes, right? Yeah. Some things are more compelling than others. Now, granted, like, I try to set out in the beginning of this document, how can we evaluate our framework? Because philosophical frameworks deal with abstract questions that lie beyond direct observation, they cannot be proven or disproven with the same empirical certainty as scientific theories. This isn't actually the best way about, like, once we get to the end of the document, this isn't the best way of going about this, but this is an intuitive way we can talk about this in our prologue. This presents a challenge. If there's no single objective test, how do we evaluate our framework? We must make a deliberate choice about the values we want our framework to uphold in line with the mission of this document. To create an actionable guide for a fulfilling life, we can evaluate our framework based on the following criteria. We've got coherence. Like, we want something that makes sense. So this is like literally in the sense that it needs to be compelling. Like that's perhaps the side of it where it needs to feel like it, is saying something. It's got some information. It's like compelling and has some information there. Explanatory power. It should account for a wide range of experiences and phenomena. So not only should it just feel compelling, but it should feel compelling in relation to your broader like life and other things you know. And both of those aren't sufficient. What we really want at the end of the day with those first two is practical utility. We want to be able to leverage it to go and do something. So that everything we do in this document is towards the practical application of it. Like what is the takeaway of the fact that, you know, what we believe to be true at any moment is subjective. Okay. What do you mean by that? Bro made it sound mystical. Oh. Some say the peak of yoga is choosing when to die. Mahasamadhi, yogis who die young or in meditation, seem to get that label automatically out of reverence. Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, if a yogi can straight up will themselves to not even will themselves, right? That wouldn't be the word, but like to straight up just to break homeostasis. One of the things I really want to look into during meditation month is both how meditation benefits our homeostasis in the fact that we can become more close to our underlying signals, and also breaks homeostasis in some sense, because the it's not like the default mode network is just some like toxic part of our brain that just operates rogue and it's new and it's like not supposed to be there. Like, it has a function that in theory is part of a larger homeostatic process. So what is happening when we're not willing, but like we're getting to a point where we shut off our one of these key aspects of our homeostasis? Like, what's the thing here? Like, perhaps the goal isn't to just meditate until you die, or at least obviously that's not the goal that we would try to push for in our community here. But also cases of people going crazy, if that's what you meant. Yeah, I'm curious, just like if you just shut off, so like that thing's going to be telling you when you're out of line. I imagine, like, people say that conscience has a voice. Like, that voice is coming from the default mode network. I think that's what like the default mode network screams conscience to me, like it's the thing that's narrating your life. So yeah, if you shut that thing off, then you might just become incredibly antisocial in some sense. So then, yeah, like, what's the balance here? Harris talks about the book Holy Madness. There's a famous story of a teacher chopping off someone's finger to make them enlightened. That's pretty toxic. Yeah, that is. Is it like a lesson of loss, of attachment and giving up? Was I supposed to stay at a certain point here? Or did this bring us down to the bottom? Yeah, refresh. All right, I lost it. Should I just go to the top? State of meditative consciousness in such many such traditions, the cultivation of samadhi through various meditation methods is essential for the attainment of spiritual liberation. And perhaps, yeah, perhaps this is spiritual liberation. Like, you can also think about being dead as like being liberated. There's a question, like, this brings us back to the whole consciousness discussion. It's like there's a question of what this mode of consciousness would be like. Perhaps it feels great, but perhaps you are also now just not a intelligent person in the measure of intelligence that allows us to understand what's going on and allows us to understand whether or not life is going well or not. Like, perhaps you just lose yourself, like you lose yourself so much so that you're not even in a state of knowing anything, right? And the question is, like, is that the goal you want? Do you want to not have any other part of your brain other than the positive emotion release? Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, how different is that from taking drugs that just make you feel positive emotion and shuts off any other thought? So there has to be some sort of balance where you want to leverage that in your own life. So sort of, it sounds like propaganda or a crusader or colonial missionary would make up. Was thinking. Oh, was I? Okay, yep. The page will confusing because it has so many meanings, right? Do you believe social science is relevant for the document? Yeah, absolutely. Social science, like just in general, isn't that a bunch of what we're gonna have to go into in part 2? Anything related to identifying and pursuing our goals? In Quintessential Dzogchen, they talk about a trap called demonic view of black dissipation. Okay, can we get the where's the table of content? Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Mahayana, the earliest extent Indian Mahayana texts emphasize ascetic practices, forest dwelling, and states of meditative oneness. The practices seem to have occupied a central piece in early Mahayana, also because they may have given access to fresh revelations and inspiration. Okay. Zen. The Zen tradition emphasizes prajna and sudden insight, but in the actual practice, prajna and samadhi, or sudden insight and gradual cultivation, are paired to each other. Okay. Right. Yep, it's different. Yeah, no, I was just trying to find branches that I recognized. I have a recommendation related to social science. You could certainly post it. I don't know if we're gonna. Actually, I don't think we can get to it because I do need to finish this stuff today. We might have to buckle down here because we have to read something else tomorrow. That is even going to be more fun. All right. So we did this, we did the snowy hill, but what will definitely happen the second time you take the slope down is what you will more likely than not find yourself you will more likely than not find yourself somewhere or another that is related to the path you took the first time. It won't be exactly that path, but it will be closer to that one than any other. And if you spend your entire afternoon sledding down, walking up, sledding down, at the end you will have some paths that have been used a lot, some that have been used very little, and there will be tracks that you have created. It is very difficult now to get out of those tracks, and those tracks are not genetically determined anymore. Right, so this is the discussion we had in the document about a path in a forest. Not the discussion, but the analogy. As you use that path, it'll become, you know, easier to identify, and you could follow it. But if you left that path unused for a long period of time, then, you know, sticks and leaves cover it up, and, you know, perhaps you can't find that path again. So that's kind of how our brain works in building connections and losing them over time, especially if we need to use them for other things. All right, the mental tracks that get laid down can lead to habits, good or bad. If we develop poor posture, it becomes hard to correct. If we develop good habits, they too become solidified. Is it possible, once tracks or neural pathways have been laid down, to get out of those paths and onto different ones? Yes, according to Pascual Leon, but it is difficult because once we have created those tracks, they become really speedy and very efficient at guiding the sled down the hill. To take a different path becomes increasingly difficult. A roadblock of some kind is necessary to help us change direction. And obviously we're going to have to deep dive into the literature on breaking addictions or bad habits. All right, when Pascual Leon learned about this school of darkness, right? His unusual boarding school in Spain, where teachers who instructed the blind went to study darkness. They were blindfolded for a week to experience blindness firsthand. A blindfold is a roadblock for the sense of light and for a sense of sight. And within the week, their tactile senses and their ability to judge space had become extremely sensitive. They were able to differentiate makes of motorcycles by the sounds of their engines and to distinguish objects in their paths by their echoes. When the teachers first removed their blindfolds, they were profoundly disoriented and couldn't judge space or see. When Pascual Leon heard about this school of darkness, he thought, let's take sighted people and make them absolutely blind. He blindfolded people for 5 days, then mapped their brains with TMS. He found that when he blocked out all light, the road block had to be impermeable. The subject's visual cortices began to process the sense of touch coming from their hands, like blind patients learning Braille. What was most astounding, however, was that the brain reorganized itself in just a few days. With brain scans, Pascual Leon showed that it could take as few as 2 days for the visual cortex to begin processing tactile and auditory signals. As well, many of the blindfolded subjects reported that as they moved or were touched or heard sounds, they began having visual hallucinations of beautiful, complex scenes of cities, skies, sunsets, Lilliputian figures, cartoon figures. Absolute darkness was essential to the change because vision is so powerful a sense that if any light got in, the visual cortex preferred to process it over sound and touch. Pascual Leon discovered, as Taub did, had that to develop a new pathway, you have to block or constrain its competitor, which is often the most commonly used pathway. After the blindfolds came off, the subject's visual cortices stopped responding to tactile or auditory stimulation within 12 to 24 hours. So they just went back to normal. Okay. As we've seen, almost all current theories of the brain are localizationist, arid. Okay, what's going on here? Almost all current theories of the brain No, this just can't sound out right. Are arid. Okay, first of all, what's arid going on here? Having no, okay, too dry. Okay, are arid. Assume that the sensory cortex processes each sense in locations devoted to processing them alone. The phrase visual cortex assumes that the sole purpose of that area of the brain is to process vision, just as the phrases auditory cortex and somatosensory cortex assume a single purpose in other areas. But, says Pascual Leon, our brains are not truly organized in terms of systems that process a given sensory modality. Rather, our brain is organized in a series of specific operators. An operator is a processor in the brain that, instead of processing input from a single sense, such as vision, touch, or hearing, processes more abstract such as vision, touch, or hearing, processes more abstract information. What is going on here? It's probably like processors handle more abstract information. One operator processes information about spatial relationships, another movement, and another shapes. Spatial relationships, movement, and shapes are information that is processed by several of our senses. We can both feel and see spatial differences, how wide a person's hand is, as we can both feel and see movement and shapes. A few operators may be good for only a single sense, for example, the color operator, but spatial, movement, and shape operators process signals from more than one. And once again, we can think about these operators in the discussion that we had in our last consciousness video, where they're both getting information from senses, from sensory stimuli, as well as from some global workspace that's capturing some information from the other operators and affecting where each goes, what it processes, or how it processes the information it's getting. An operator is selected by competition. The operator theory appears to draw on the theory of neuronal group selection developed in 1987 by Nobel Prize winner Edelman, who proposed that for any brain activity, the ablest group of neurons is selected to do the task. There is an almost Darwinian competition, a neural Darwinism, to use Edelman's phrase, going on all the time between operators to see which ones can most effectively process signals from a particular sense and in a particular circumstance. This theory provides an elegant bridge between the localizationist emphasis on things tending to happen in certain typical locations and the neuroplastician's emphasis on the brain's ability to restructure itself. What it implies is that people learning a new skill can recruit operators devoted to other activities, vastly increasing their processing power, provided they can create a roadblock between the operator they need and its usual function. Okay. Someone presented with an overwhelming auditory task, such as memorizing Homer's Iliad, might blindfold himself to recruit operators usually devoted to sight, since the vast operators in the visual cortex can process sound. Crazy. Crazy stuff. Okay. What's the theory of social systems? Okay, we might have to put this into our broader necessary research for part 2. Actually, this would be part 1. All right. All right, how much more? I think we're going to have still a lot. So we have seen that imagining an act engages the same motor and sensory programs that are involved in doing it. We have long viewed our imaginative life with a kind of sacred awe as noble, pure, immaterial, and ethereal, cut off from our material brain. Now we cannot be so sure about where to draw the line between them. Everything your immaterial mind imagines leaves material traces. Each thought alters the physical state of your brain's synapses at a microscopic level. Each time you imagine moving your fingers across the keys to play the piano, you alter the tendrils in your living brain. These experiments are not only delightful and intriguing, they also overturn the centuries of confusion that have grown out of the work of the French philosopher Descartes, who argued that mind and brain are made of different substances and are governed by different laws. The brain, he claimed, was a physical, material thing existing in space and obeying the laws of physics. The mind, or the soul, as Descartes called it, was immaterial, a thinking thing that did not take up space or obey physical laws. Thoughts, he argued, were governed by the rules of reasoning, judgment, and desires, not by the physical laws of cause and effect. Human beings consisted of this duality, this marriage of immaterial mind and material brain. Where's Jago when we need him to get our Descartes hate in here? But Descartes, whose mind-body division has dominated science for 400 years, could never credibly explain how the immaterial mind could influence the material brain. As a result, people began to doubt that an immaterial thought or mere imagining might change the structure of the material brain. Descartes' views seem to open an unbridgeable gap between mind and brain. All right, but now we can see that our immaterial thoughts too have a physical signature, and we cannot be so sure that thought won't someday be explained in physical terms. While we have yet to understand exactly how thoughts actually change brain structure, it is now clear that they do, and the firm line that Descartes drew between mind and brain is increasingly a dotted line. Right? And I guess we've gotten a little bit more since 2007 when this was written, but I thought we were moving. All right, the same process occurs in humans. What are we talking about? When we learn, we alter which genes in our neurons are expressed or turned on. So now we're talking about epigenetics. Our genes have two functions. The first, the template function, allows our genes to replicate, making copies of themselves that are passed from generation to generation. The template function is beyond our control. The second is the transcription function. Each cell in our body contains all our genes, but not all those genes are turned on or expressed. When a gene is turned on, it makes a new protein that alters the structure and function of the cell. This is called the transcription function because when the gene is turned on, information about how to make these proteins is transcribed or read from the individual gene. This transcription function is influenced by what we do and think. And this is like the most fundamental viewing of neuroplasticity. What's happening is proteins being made in response to certain contexts and scenarios, and depending, which parts of the brain the actual DNA is at. So, all right, most people assume that our genes shape us, our behavior, and our brain anatomy. Kendall's work shows that what we learn, when we learn, our minds also affect which genes in our neurons are transcribed. Thus, we can shape our genes, which in turn shape our brain's microscopic anatomy. So it's not that we shape our genes; we shape which genes are like turned on or off during transcription. Candell argues that when psychotherapy changes people, it presumably does so through learning, by producing changes in gene expression that alter the strength of synaptic connections and structural changes that alter the anatomical pattern of interconnections between nerve cells of the brain. These are the connections we've been talking about. Psychotherapy works by going deep into the brain and its neurons and changing their structure by turning on the right genes. Psychiatrist Susan Vaughan has argued that the talking cure works by talking to neurons, and that an effective psychotherapist or psychoanalyst is a microsurgeon of the mind who helps patients make needed alterations in neuronal networks. That's a pretty cool way to think about it. Do you guys think Heidegger formed his philosophy to fit his political views, or were his political views formed by his philosophy? See, what's weird for me is like being in time to me has nothing to do with politics at all, and like I think the most fundamental reading of it doesn't include anything about politics at all. I think what happened though is people took the fact that he was in that political. I mean, it's probably like neither or both. It's like chances are his experiences led to what he experienced, but I don't know if it doesn't mean that what he was communicating was specifically political. But yeah, like Heidegger talks about a very, very low level of like he uses the words authenticity and inauthenticity, like the authentic mode of capital B being and inauthentic mode of capital B being. And people I think have misconstrued that to be a prescription about what is authentic and what isn't authentic. And I'm pretty certain that the way that Heidegger talks about these ideas assaults the very idea of considering that something is authentic or isn't authentic in some sense. Similarly, like a lot of people talk about how we can be more authentic. And I don't know if that's something that comes from Heidegger or not, but given the rest of what Heidegger says, like that's not a way we can think about authenticity. We can't just make ourselves more authentic. That's not how this works. Our authentic and inauthentic modes of being are just they're describing like the behavior of our brains rather than describing the contents of them, if that makes any sense. It's like a very abstract behavior of our brain to make certain thoughts appear to us, and for those thoughts to feel certain. That's the inauthentic mode of being. And then the authentic mode of being talks about how our brain is constantly looking towards the next thing. Like the authentic mode of being is what keeps us always forward looking. In like if we were to think about predictive processing, like that like we would point to the authentic mode of being, perhaps predominantly, but also the inauthentic mode of being allows us to like operate on our predictions in a sense. So you would be surprised at how esoteric that whole political movement was. So it raises the question, right? So yeah, like the question is like whether or not people leverage that in a different way. Now also, yeah, if Heidegger took his own stuff and then like if he took Being in Time and ran with it politically, then you know I'm definitely you know I'm deducting points, and I've already deducted a lot of points from Heidegger. But regardless of Heidegger, like who cares about this person that happened to write this thing? Like Being in Time by itself, I don't think is political at all, and it has like profound wisdom about our experience. But the problem is, like, you know, we're dealing with something that was written by a Nazi, and it's very difficult to understand. So like those two things together makes it really difficult to leverage Being in Time as like a useful resource today. Now, that doesn't, I don't think it's necessarily the case that we ought not use it as a resource. Like I think I was able to use it in a resource or use it as a resource that doesn't prescribe anything. So I think you know we've gotten in and gotten out unscathed in some sense. I mean, I guess anyone can make the argument that because we've leveraged these certain aspects of meaning, that people or that's somehow muddied the entire waters of our document here. But yeah, I don't know. It raises the question. Oh, I don't know what I said here. Wikipedia has a whole list of people who agree and disagree about the link between his political affiliation and his philosophy. There's a lot of people on here. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just that none of like what I read, both in reading that book, also reading like multiple complementary resources, like I don't know, what is there, the Cambridge Guide to Being in Time? Is this the Cambridge Companion? Like this, I don't think this talks about the political. You know what? I shouldn't say that, because this book might be a bunch of a bunch of different people's articles about this. So perhaps someone here did talk about the politics, and I guess that could still be in there. But I don't think any of these topics went into the politics here. I think these are all pretty close to home. But even some of the other ones that I read, there is a guide to Being in Time. Did I read that as well? I think I did read this, because that name, Magna King, rings a bell. And I remember reading Being in Time, Tietz. I don't know if this is just some graduate student, but I found this to be very helpful. Yeah, this an outline and study guide John Tietz. Who is John Tietz? 2001. All right, John Tietz. Author? I don't know. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to find this person. He might even introduce himself here. Oh. Frankfurt, Germany. Oh, geez. We're never going to find him. But this was helpful too. I remember this. This being a lot of help. And this goes through. I don't know if this is. Does this even say the word politics? Oh, political. Here we go. We got 7. We are disburdened of independence, not metaphysical, but social, moral, and political by the they. Okay, so yeah, when we're talking about the they, we're already talking about the inauthentic mode of being. This isn't talking about politics in any like specific way. It's just saying that like politics is affecting the thoughts that we have. It's really just pointing out the contingency of our experience. Okay, I feel like we don't need to go through all this. Because there's going to be a... Oh! What's going on here? Equally possible, however... Oh, this is actually great to have this type of thing. Okay. Dasein's care is the basis for its disclosing the nature of its heritage, and that is one's choice, whether one wants to be a part of it or whether one will just go along. This entire discussion can, perhaps should, be applied to Heidegger's choosing Nazism during his rectorship at Freiburg University. He clearly saw the Nazis as a destiny, in his sense connected. He seems to have thought with the salvation of Germany and its return to its past self-determination and glory. Equally possible, however, Heidegger wanted to use the Nazis as a way of advancing quickly through the university administration to a position of power. Perhaps he saw himself as fated to redeem German philosophy by allowing himself to be used by the Nazis in university politics. Okay. So okay. Usually the events of past politics, trying to counter the relativism implicit in positivism. All right, that's not going to help us out too much. All right, I think we're chilling. Sorry about that. Okay. Heidegger, the type of guy to write a book. True. Screw those people. What was he trying to say? Oh, which one? I'm sorry. What is it with these Germans and destiny? Right. That said, I don't know if there's anything like that talks about a concrete destiny, like for being in time. Once you get to a concrete idea, like a concrete concept, like everything Hegel is already in this like inauthentic mode of being. This idea of like concrete determinate concepts. We've already fallen to the they, he says, which is like, you know, this social aspect of our experience. Yeah, there's no way of thinking about destiny as a concrete thing in Heidegger land. It's everything is always up in the air. That's why he points he points out the ungrounded nature of human existence. And I guess Hegel does a similar thing for the idea of destiny. Like the absolute spirit is not one where we arrive at an end. So like even Hegel couldn't be a Nazi in that sense. I shouldn't say that. Like I should say the theory of mind telling of Hegelian dialectics that Brandom has given us in the past 10 years would not allow us to arrive at Nazism, right? Like that's not what these philosophies are about. It's like we're talking about something at a different level of abstraction than concrete philosophies or politics. Being in time was a career move. Yeah, that's so funny. That's such a great conspiracy theory to just like bring up in a guide. Like perhaps he was doing this. Yeah, regardless, certainly I'm not going to defend this author's views on anything other than what is in Being in Time. If Heidegger existed today, I would give him 2 thumbs down. All right, we can move up to here. Free association is based on the understanding that all our mental associations, even seemingly random ones that appear to make no sense, are expressions of links formed in our memory networks. Oh my gosh, look at this. This brings us right back to our discussion of concepts. His law of association by simultaneity implicitly links changes in neuronal networks with changes in our memory networks so that neurons that fire together years before wire together. And these original connections are often still in place and show up in a patient's free associations. Okay, so this is we're talking about Freud now. We're talking about him using methods to get people's like not innate, but early associations that they might have forgotten about and whatnot. To be changed, Freud argued, memories had to be conscious and become the focus of our conscious attention, as neuroscientists have since shown. Unfortunately, as was the case with Mr. L, certain traumatic memories of events that happened early in childhood are not easily accessible to consciousness, so they don't change. Okay. Helping patients understand their transferences allowed them to improve their relationships. Most importantly, Freud discovered that transferences of early traumatic scenes could often be altered if he pointed out to the patient that was happening. What was happening when the transference was activated and the patient was paying close attention. Thus, the underlying neuronal networks and the associated memories could be retranscribed and changed. Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism was a career move theory. Yeah, I mean, it's effective. Like we should come up with like the most intuitive theory we could come up with. Sell that, and then once we've got the squad, we could slowly switch. Maybe I could go through this whole thing where like, I saw this. I should say I was teleported, and now I believe. Just to go full circle here. All right, a mother who is with her baby during the critical period for emotional development and attachment is constantly teaching her child what emotions are by using musical speech and nonverbal gestures. When she looks at her child who swallowed some air with her milk, she might say, there, honey, you look so upset. Don't be frightened. Your tummy hurts because you ate so fast. Let mommy burp you and give you a hug, and you'll feel all right. She's telling the child the name of the... Okay, so this is like what I try to point out all the time. She's telling the child the name of the emotion, fright, that it has a trigger, she ate too fast, that the emotion is communicated by facial expression, you look so upset, that it is associated with a bodily sensation, a tummy cramp, and that turning to others for relief is often helpful. That mother has given her child a crash course in the many aspects of emotion conveyed not only with words, but with the loving music of her voice and the reassurance of her gestures and touch. And then I just read something 2 nights ago about how children really young, before they even like have the words to make sense of it, seemingly learn social norms really early on. Like I think it was like even within the first year. So yeah, obviously the kid's not going to be internalizing the full story here, but maybe they're picking up on certain stimuli, they're picking up on like how the mom is reacting to a certain like the fact that the mom understand what's happening is really important. Like for a young child, you never want to look to the parent and see that the parent is in shambles or is unable to comprehend what's going on. That's terrifying. But the kid can always look to the parent to see if the parent understands what's going on. What's your perspective on the theory of the Oedipus complex? I don't know much about it, honestly. I haven't looked into the Oedipus complex at all. I don't think. I think I've only heard of it from Jordan Peterson. I forget what Jordan Peterson says about it. Yeah. Yeah. I don't recall. If there's science that says that it's legit, then I think it's legit by nature of the science. And if science says that it's not legit, to what extent? Is that even a thing to say? I feel like I know it's legit, but I don't know what the expressions are that I could say are legit, that I'm allowed to say are legit. All right. Neuroscientists recognize two major memory systems. Both are plastically altered in psychotherapy. The well-developed memory system in 26-month-old children is called procedural or implicit memory. These terms are often used interchangeably by Kandel. Procedural implicit memory functions when we learn a procedure or group of automatic actions occurring outside our focused attention, in which words are generally not required. Our nonverbal interactions with people and many of our emotional memories are part of our procedural memory system. As Kandel says, during the first 2 to 3 years of life, when an infant's interaction with its mother is particularly important, the infant relies primarily on its procedural memory systems. Procedural memories are generally unconscious. Riding a bike depends on procedural memory, and most people who ride easily would have trouble consciously explaining precisely how they do it. The procedural memory system confirms that we can have unconscious memories, as Freud proposed. So I totally forgot that we were writing down notes here, that I should be some of these things I really should have written down that we mentioned. Neuroplasticity. Okay, this is where I'm just writing all of our notes. Find notes. What page are we on right now? Oh, we don't have a page? 161. Okay, find notes between, I don't know, it was like here maybe? Between like 130 and 161. And then I want to go back to what we just did. Do I remember? Okay, let's just go to 160. That's quicker. This is certainly... I have to write this down. This is huge. Oh no, what's gone? What's happened here? Could we get... Oh, they all have... It all has the extra space. Now I have to remove the space. There we go. All right, then the next one I wanted to... so this whole thing, I should have that extra... No. Maybe this? Can I just do this? All right. Then the next one I wanted to do, this guy, because we do use this. I think I want to maybe use this stuff as a reference. All right, the other form of memory is called explicit or declarative memory, which is just beginning to develop in the 26-month-old. Explicit memory consciously recollects specific facts. Explicit memory consciously recollects specific facts, events, and episodes. So one of the cool things, though, I think that is the case, is that like implicit memory can involve like behaviors of thought that lead to what we consider to be explicit or declarative memory. Like our explicit declarative memory is afforded by our implicit memory of that, like thinking that thing. Like this is how we can think about, like my experience of thinking about a certain thing as procedural almost in a sense. Like even though we're describing what's explicit as explicit and declarative, there's still a procedure underneath that's that's generating this thought. Freud was wildin', bro. No one believes that stuff, man. Come on now. Bro really said it's all sex. So did Robert California in The Office. And he seemed to know what he was talking about. Does your document have advice related to memory? It certainly will. It will have to. But that's a good point. Does part 2 currently have something about memory? About remembering? Let's make sure that's written down somewhere. In part 2, this is going to have to be in thinking, identifying what to pursue, making sense of the moment, deliberate reflection and thinking. Memory. Make sure to discuss memory here as it affects our current moment of thinking. How can we improve memory? Both long-term and in the moment. All right. Thank you very much, Energy Dompter. All right. Explicit memory consciously recollects specific facts, blah, blah, blah. It is the memory we use when we describe and make explicit what we did on the weekend and with whom and for how long. It helps us organize our memories by time and place. Explicit memory is supported by language and becomes more important once children can talk. People have been traumatized in the first 3 years can be expected to have few, if any, explicit memories of their traumas, but procedural implicit memories of these traumas exist and are commonly evoked or triggered when people get into situations that are similar to the trauma. When memories often seem to come at us out of the blue and do not seem to be classified by time, place, and context the way most explicit memories are. Okay. Procedural memories of emotional interactions often get repeated in transference or in life. We learned from HM's case that the hippocampus turns our short-term explicit memories into long-term explicit memories for people, places, and things, memories to which we have conscious access. I think that's documented in the document. In neuroplastic terms, activating and paying close attention to the link between everyday separations and his catastrophic response to them allowed him to unwire the connection and alter the pattern. I think this is a person who was scared of maybe death or maybe whatever that one thing you can have that makes you scared of going outside that Jordan Peterson talks about all the time. I'm not sure. Mr. L did not get better all at once. He had first experienced cycles of separations, dreams, depressions, and insights. The repetition or working through required for long-term neuroplastic change. New ways of relating had to be learned, wiring new neurons together, and old ways of responding had to be unlearned, weakening neuronal links. Because Mr. L had linked the ideas of separation and death, they were wired together in his neuronal networks. Now that he was conscious of his associations, he could unlearn it. Our recent brain scans done before and after psychotherapy show that the brain plastically recognizes itself in treatment and that the more successful the treatment, the greater the change. Reorganizes itself, not recognizes itself. Plasticity reorganizes itself. The more successful the treatment, the greater the change. When patients relive their traumas and have flashbacks and uncontrollable emotions, the flow of blood to the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobes, which help regulate our behavior, decreases, indicating that these areas are less active. According to neuropsychoanalyst Mark Solms and neuroscientist Turnbull, the aim of the talking cure from the neurobiological point of view is to extend the functional sphere of influence of the prefrontal lobes. I imagine that's almost the goal of meditation as well, to always be able to get a grasp on our experience when it starts taking us into a very automatic mode of being. Agoraphobia, that's the one. That's the very one. May I ask an off-topic question? Yo, Jaco. Oh, hell yeah. Imagine if we started talking to each other like we had like a conversation between the streams, but it was unexplainable. Yes, you may ask an off-topic question. even though your document is, to my understanding, apolitical. When it comes to your personal views, what's your perspective on the ideas of Ben Shapiro? So if this channel ever goes in the political direction, or in the direction where we're just covering political content, it's going to be, I mean, even though I'll probably fail to keep my views out of this, I'm gonna be mainly focusing on how people conduct themselves in terms of like the linguistics they use, what type of semantic games they play, whether they're using logical fallacies or not, like regardless of what their point is, right? Like I'm just looking at how are they playing the game of giving and asking for reasons. And so far, like I've seen Ben Shapiro do a lot of things that I would find are sus. And I don't know what I'm not going to say that I know the intention. I don't know if it's something where it's like he's being purposefully dishonest, or if he doesn't have a hold over his automatic brain systems. Because as we pointed out, like rationality is not like a not emotional thing. So when people are pressed up against a wall, they can manage to leverage linguistics and semantics to make things make sense in ways that are breaking what we would describe as like logical rules. And the question is like, who decides what the logical rules are? Well, we just kind of have them written down. We can internalize them, and we can recognize when they're broken or not sometimes, if we're paying really close attention. But it comes down to whether or not we feel like they've been broken. That's the only judgment we can have. Need a crossover episode. That would be so funny. Like, I don't even know. I mean, I guess it would be a game. I bet there's going to be a game that comes out that Scott and I would both want to play. Stan would white Ben Shapiro. I would lose to Ben Shapiro in almost any type of social. No, I shouldn't say that. Any type of verbal combat. If there was any competition, I would certainly lose him. I could probably destroy him physically, yeah. But that's because I don't think he's that tall or like technically massive. You would engage in physical regulation. I would back you. It's very nice, thank you. But yeah, like I don't want to do debate, and I don't want to, because I'm also not, I don't think I'm great in, currently I'm not great in positions where I'm emotionally charged. Like I want to get better at that. So like perhaps I should just touch into the, I want to do discussions, and chances are those discussions will be just disagreeable enough that I can learn and get better at that. But I would rather try to keep things productive, and I hope that I would be able to identify when someone's doing something that's making the conversation different than what I think we would be productive, and that's hopefully going to be my strength. It's not going to be too like the idea of a debate where you have a conclusion that you have to defend on all costs. Like you have a side, right? Like that to me is not something I'm interested in, because that's an influence or an incentive that is going to be counter to our ability to think effectively. So he wouldn't be able to out-rap me and Jago. You are technically massive. Well, that's what I mean. Like, yeah, like in terms of mass, I think I probably beat him in mass. I'm asking your perspective on his ideas. To my understanding, your document is apolitical. However, I'm asking you to share your personal perspective on his political ideas related to subject matters like economics, immigration, abortion, or do you not want to discuss those even when you have free time? I probably don't understand his ideas, but if I were to guess, I would guess that I don't agree with him on the pragmatic ways about going to getting to what he wants. Like perhaps we would agree on what we want in the end, right? Like perhaps we agree on the ends. Like usually people do agree on the ends, and what they disagree on is like the means to get there. And I would probably disagree with him on those means, given just what I know about my political leanings. So and I'm like Michael Jackson with those leanings, let's just say. If you ever have a panel discussion, put me in the call, so if anyone steps out of line, I can turn on the mic and derail the stream to bail you out. What's the go-to derailing statement here? Like what's your opening line? All right, I gotta just jump in so that we keep making progress here. All right, we talked about that. Oh, we're moving. Oh, we got hit. We got hit by a wall. The newest brain scans show that when we dream, that part of the brain that processes emotion and our sexual survival and aggressive instincts is quite active. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex system, which is responsible for inhibiting our emotions and instincts, shows lower activity. Right, yeah, so nothing, like we're not inhibiting anything here. That's why dreams get so wild. With instincts turned up and inhibitions turned down, the dreaming brain can reveal impulses that are normally blocked from awareness. Scores of studies show that sleep helps us consolidate learning and memory and affects plastic change. When we learn a skill during the day, we will be better at it the next day if we have a good night's sleep. Sleeping on a problem often does make sense. A team led by Frank has also shown that sleep enhances neuroplasticity during the critical period when most plastic change takes place. Recall that Hubble and Wiesel blocked one eye of a kitten in the critical period and showed that the brain map for the blocked eye was taken over by the good eye, a case of use it or lose it. That's what we discussed yesterday. Frank's team did the same experiment with two groups of kittens, one group that it deprived of sleep. Okay, this is just messed up now. And another group that got a full amount of it. They found that the more sleep the kittens got, the greater the plastic change in their brain map. The dream state also facilitated plastic change. Sleep is divided into two stages, and most of our dreaming occurs during one of them, called rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, which I think is pretty commonly known now. Infants spend many more hours in REM sleep than adults, and it is during infancy that neuroplastic change occurs most rapidly. In fact, REM sleep is required for the plastic development of the brain in infancy. Oh, I don't know. I don't want to know what study allowed them to figure this one out. A team led by Marks did a study similar to Frank's that looked at the effects of REM sleep on kittens and on their brain structure. Marks found that in the kittens deprived of REM sleep, the neurons in their visual cortex were actually smaller, so REM sleep seems necessary for neurons to grow normally. REM sleep has also been shown to be particularly important for enhancing our ability to retain emotional memories and for allowing the hippocampus to turn short-term memories of the day before into long-term ones. In other words, it helps make memories more permanent, leading to structural change in the brain. Each day in analysis, Mr. L worked on his core conflicts, memories, and traumas, and at night there was dream evidence not only of his buried emotions, but of the brain reinforcing the learning and unlearning he had done. Okay, a team led by Marks. I think was it Marks or was it Mark? No, it's literally Marks. Oh my gosh. This is how he goes undercover. He just goes by Marks. Something like just putting the mic in my mouth. Yeah, if you start doing some ASMR, I'll listen. Well, I understand what you're saying. I'm still not certain about your personal political views on what you desire to happen when it comes to public policy. I don't know enough about public policy, honestly, to consider what should happen in order to reach my goals. What I am open to is reasons on both ends. But the problem with reasons is they can feel compelling, even though there are compelling counter reasons for, that lead to a different conclusion. So what I really like when I'm like in terms of politics, I want the best carrier of one idea to fight against the best carrier of the other idea. This is the only way I know how to distinguish what's good and not. Staying in a bubble does not help me because I don't know if there's counter arguments. I need the best guy to I shouldn't say guy here. I have the best person to fight against the best person on the other side, and I need to see that clash happen. I need to see who who follows the rules of like logic, like who's breaking the rules, and what just sounds more compelling. I'm a radical centrist, the most enlightened ideology. Well, so given my, I would say like given my past experience of seeing ideas clash, I would say I do end up on a side. I wouldn't say I'm a centrist. So my ideology is whatever benefits me in the moment, or the opposite of whoever I'm trolling. Hell yeah. Yeah. Jago, are you free? Or have you broken the shackles? My political opinion is whatever pisses off Piers Morgan the most. Amen. Amen, I say to thee. All right. All right, what are we at here? Okay. But there's another possible cause. It has recently been discovered that early childhood trauma causes massive plastic change in the hippocampus, shrinking it so that new long-term explicit memories cannot form. Animals removed from their mothers let out desperate cries, then enter a turned-off state, as Spitz's infants did. And then they release a stress hormone called glucocorticoid. Okay. It kills cells in the hippocampus so that it cannot make the synaptic connections and neural networks that make learning and explicit long-term memory possible. These early stresses predispose these motherless animals to stress-related illness for the rest of their lives. When they undergo long separations, the gene to initiate production of glucocorticoids gets turned on and stays on for extended periods. So this is going back to I think we have this in the document, that trauma affects our epigenetics in such a way where certain genes are going to be now, not expressed. Trauma in infancy appears to lead to supersensitization, a plastic alteration of the brain neurons that regulate glucocorticoids. Recent research in humans shows that adult survivors of childhood abuse also show signs of glucocorticoid supersensitivity lasting into adulthood. That the hippocampus shrinks is an important neuroplastic discovery and may help explain why Mr. L had so few explicit memories from adolescence. Depression, high stress, and childhood trauma all release glucocorticoid and kill cells in the hippocampus, leading to memory loss. The longer people are depressed, the smaller their hippocampus gets. The hippocampus of depressed adults who suffered prepubertal childhood trauma is 18% smaller than that of depressed adults without childhood trauma, a downside of the plastic brain. We literally lose essential cortical real estate in response to illness. If the stress is brief, this decrease in size is temporary. If it is too prolonged, the damage is permanent. As people recover from depression, their memories return, and research suggests their hippocampus can grow back. Hippocampi? In fact, the hippocampus is one of two areas where new neurons are created from our own stem cells as part of normal functioning. If Mr. L had hippocampal damage, he had recovered from it by his early 20s when he began forming explicit memories again. Antidepressant medications increase the number of stem cells that become new neurons in the hippocampus. Rats given Prozac for 3 weeks had a 70% increase in the number of cells in their hippocampi. It usually takes 3 to 6 weeks for antidepressants to work in humans, perhaps coincidentally the same amount of time it takes for newly born neurons in the hippocampus to mature, extend their projections, and connect with other neurons. So we may, without knowing it, have been helping people get out of depression by using medications that foster brain plasticity. Since people who improve in psychotherapy also find that their memories improve, it may be that it also stimulates neuronal growth in their hippocampi. I did hand in my exam, but 2 people want to play ARAM, so I'll get one. Then we can rip. How's that? Yeah, hell yeah, go for it. I could finish up. I could try to finish up reading through this thing. Which political side have you ended up on out of curiosity, if it's not too much to ask? It's almost, for me right now, I'm not interested in like I mean, chances are there's a side, that I would say I'm generally on. Like, I think I generally lean left. However, right now I'm only focused on anti-MAGA. That's the only thing that matters right now. It does not matter about whether or not we're leveraging like a conservative economy versus a liberal economy. I don't. It really doesn't matter right now. Those are smaller things to deal with than the problem that we currently have right now regarding our futures. We have a serious problem right now, but I'll just leave it at that. Stan asking Jago questions like he's communist revolutionary. Are you free? Have you breaking off the shackles? I mean, maybe that's just my relationship with school. I remember that the last day of exams being euphoric. Also, Jago, congrats, by the way, on that. I don't know if you're still here, but that is very cool. Whoa, anti-MAGA. It's really just anti the administration, but unfortunately that means I have to be anti the whole movement. But on the ballot, was he there? No, I don't care. Do I care? No. Dude, he's everywhere. He's behind you. He's Slenderman. There are some people, however, who retain this mental plasticity far beyond the usual age limit, and others who lose it prematurely. Such people, he observed, have great difficulties getting rid of their neuroses in psychoanalytic treatment. They can activate transferences, but have difficulty changing them. Mr. L had certainly had a fixed character structure for over 50 years. How then was he able to change? Okay. The answer is part of a larger riddle that I call the plastic paradox, and that I consider one of the most important lessons of this book. The plastic paradox is that the same neuroplastic properties that allow us to change our brains and produce more flexible behaviors can also allow us to produce more rigid ones. All people start out with plastic potential. Some of us develop into increasingly flexible children and stay that way through our adult lives. For others, the spontaneity, creativity, and unpredictability of childhood gives way to a routinized existence that repeats the same behavior and turns us into rigid caricatures of ourselves. Anything that involves unvaried repetition, our careers, cultural activities, skills, and neuroses, can lead to rigidity. Indeed, it is because we have a neuroplastic brain that we can develop these rigid behaviors in the first place. As Pascal Leon's metaphor illustrates, neuroplasticity is like pliable snow on a hill. All right, we just say the same stuff. But should we choose the same path a second or third time, tracks will start to develop, and soon we will tend to get stuck in a rut. Our route will now be quite rigid as neural circuits, once established, tend to become self-sustaining. So I'm gonna grab from that. This is a huge deal, and this is what we're up against in part 2. This is like an opening thesis that we have to deal with now. It's like there are things. So first of all, there are genetic things that we can't change, but then there's non-genetic things that are at different levels of internalization. Let's just say more things are. We can think about things that are more or less conditioned or internalized or rigid as part of how we think about the world and how we operate within it, how we behave. So we'd have to consider how we can get out of things that first of all, we have to consider how we can identify the things that we wouldn't want to take place, and then how we can, get out of those. And, there's a lot of stuff to deal with all that. Rejuvenation. Do we have anything on rejuvenation? Oh, we were chilling for a while. Out of curiosity, do you not believe there is reasonable criticisms of certain policies associated with... I think there are. That's not important right now. Once again, the things that I find most important right now is like loss of democracy and stuff like that. I think there are great discussions to be had about like actual right versus left pragmatic solutions to problems that we all care about. How show a correlation between bail reform and increased crime rates and higher taxes, to my understanding, are sometimes correlated with less investment in job creation. Right, like all these things are things that we need to talk about, and like I think it's been a failing of our like, I don't know, politicians and also our like media, that we haven't had effective conversations at that level. Unfortunately for politicians, it's so risky to have a debate against someone with competing ideas, because if they're effective enough, it could look like you don't know what you're talking about. So unfortunately, we really can't rely on politicians to be our policy, like who's gonna actually argue this stuff at the front lines. So yeah, we need effective thinkers out there. We need effective like influencers that are actually willing to debate across the aisle and find literally the best of the other side. Like, I really don't care about someone that's going to a college campuses and arguing. I don't care because what is the college kid gonna like? How effective is the college kid on both sides going to be at purveying their side, their views? Like we need experts. Have it like and when I say the front lines, like this is akin to our discussion about concepts earlier. Like we can't identify the front lines until we see the clash. The clash tells us where the line is. So we need to see people actually find those lines, and such that we can, because usually at the end of this stuff there is a trade-off, right? So like what you're bringing up is there might be some negative externality to some other thing. So the question is, what do we care about more? And like, so chances are there's a lot of like highly complex political moves that we can make that make certain things worse and certain things better, and we have to consider which one we actually value more. And only once we find those front lines can we all get to decide on whether or not we care about one thing versus the other. Only one man can save the Republican Party, Mitt Romney. If Romney won in 2012, MAGA would not be able to penetrate the center. The Mormon defense would be extraordinary. That is a argument to be made. If he won, that could have affected things significantly. Honestly, if Trump won a second term, I think the country would be in a significantly less dangerous position right now. Like I think he needed those 4 years to prepare what he's doing right now, or for other people to prepare, right, to prepare that playbook. But who knows? Who knows? We could play hypotheticals all day. We can only identify what is happening right now. Thus, we learn from these dying patients that living neurons form in us until the very end of our lives. The search continues for neuronal stem cells in parts of the human brain. So far, they've also been found active in the olfactory bulb and dormant and inactive in the septum, the striatum, and the spinal cord. Gage and others are working on treatments that might activate dormant stem cells with drugs and be useful if an area where they are dormant suffers damage. They're also trying to find out whether stem cells can be transplanted into injured brain areas or even induced more of to move to those areas. So I imagine the stem cell stuff, there's been a lot of progress on since 2007. So Gage's colleagues showed that the most effective contributor to increased proliferation of new neurons was the running wheel. After a month on the wheel, so this is talking about mice on a wheel, I think. The mice had doubled the number of new neurons in the hippocampus. Mice don't really run on running wheels, Gage told me, it only looks like they do because the wheels provide so little resistance. Rather, they walk quickly. That is actually pretty funny. The mice are just walking quickly on the wheels. Thus, physical exercise and learning work in complementary ways. The first to make new stem cells, the second to prolong their survival. So this is, yeah, this is a huge deal when we're talking about, you know, so much of our lives, whether it's cognitive or you know, longevity and stuff like that. Physical exercise seems to be huge, and physical exercise with learning. All right, not all activities are equal in what regard? What regard are we talking about? We know that exercise and mental activity in animals generate and sustain more brain cells, and we have many studies confirming that humans who lead mentally active lives have better brain function. The more educated we have, the more education we have, the more socially and physically active we are, and the more we participate in mentally stimulating activities. Okay, this is a second idea. And the more we participate in mentally stimulating activities, the less likely we are to get Alzheimer's disease or dementia. That's what this channel is all about. We're just all trying to not get Alzheimer's here. So we have to think about, like, the only reason we have to think about all these topics is just so that we don't get Alzheimer's. These topics, it could be anything, but we just happen to do something like towards improving people's lives. Like, we don't actually have to do that. But not all activities are equal in this regard. Those that involve genuine concentration, studying a musical instrument, playing board games, reading, and dancing, are associated with a lower risk for dementia. Okay. Dancing, which requires learning new moves, is both physically and mentally challenging and requires much concentration, less intense activity. So we should all get into dancing, honestly. It seems like the best, both worlds. Less intense activities such as bowling, babysitting, and golfing are not associated with a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's. That's a subtweet here. These studies are suggestive, but stop short of proving that we can prevent Alzheimer's disease with brain exercises. These activities are associated with or correlated with less Alzheimer's, but correlations don't prove causality. It is possible that people with very early onset but undetectable Alzheimer's begin slowing down early in life and so stop being active. The most we can say about the relationship between brain exercises and Alzheimer's at the moment is that it seems very promising. So this is also stale, probably. We probably know more. All right, what do we got here? Physical activity. Physical activity is helpful not only because it creates new neurons, but because the mind is based in the brain and the brain needs oxygen. Walking, cycling, or cardiovascular exercise strengthens the heart and the blood vessels that supply the brain and helps people who engage in these activities feel mentally sharper, as pointed out by the Roman philosopher Seneca 2,000 years ago. Recent research shows that exercise stimulates the production and release of the neural growth factor, BDNF, which, as we saw in Chapter 3, Redesigning the Brain, plays a crucial role in affecting plastic change. In fact, whatever keeps the heart and blood vessels fit invigorates the brain, including a healthy diet. A brutal workout is not necessary. Consistent natural movement of the limbs will do. As Van Praagh and Gage discovered, simply walking at a good pace stimulates the growth of new neurons. Exercise stimulates your sensory and motor cortices and maintains your brain's balanced system. These functions begin to deteriorate as we age, making us prone to falling and becoming housebound. Nothing speeds brain atrophy more than being immobilized in the same environment. The monotony undermines our dopamine and attentional systems, crucial to maintaining brain plasticity. A cognitively rich physical activity, such as learning new dances, will probably help ward off balance problems and have the added benefit of being social, which preserves brain health. Tai Chi, though it hasn't been studied, requires intense concentration on motor movements and stimulates the brain's balance system. I would say yoga should be in this discussion. It also has a meditative aspect, which has been... is Tai Chi a sort of yoga, or is that a sort of martial arts? It also has a meditative aspect, which has been proven very effective in lowering stress, and so is likely to preserve memory and the hippocampal neurons. All right. Okay, do rap battles count? Me and Jago doing the tango. I don't exercise it consistently. However, I gradually walk daily. That's great. That's great. Getting the walk in daily is great. Um, I don't know. Yeah, like I don't know. In a discussion about optimal exercise, I don't know how much walking would be necessary. Like whether it's like 20 to 30 minutes of walking, but that walking is great. Another thing that's great, since you're already walking, I don't know if you're walking like for leisure or not, but walking right after you eat, I think, can affect your digestion such that you get more nutrients out of the meal you just had. So if you're, eating healthy, or you're I don't know, trying to bulk or something, then you can walk after you eat. And I mean, also it just helps digestion, which is great. But walking is one of the best exercises because it's easy and accessible. Tai Chi, I believe, is Taoist, and you try to manipulate the energy of the body. The Chi, okay, that's cool. Yogis call it prana. Walking 10,000 steps is good. I've heard people lose weight from walking and diet. It sounds absurd, but apparently it works. Our ancestors probably walked a lot, right? Yeah, I wonder how they felt about running. Like, I know a lot of people just, despise running today and don't run all the time. But yeah, was running just a thing that people didn't despise back in the day? Like, was everyone getting runner's highs all the time? I have a meditator friend who's into Tai Chi. It does seem interesting. That's cool. Maybe that's something we'll have to get into at one point. I think it would be fun on this channel for me to like at one point leverage the stuff that we learn, especially regarding like learning skills, and then have like be a case study. That would be fun for everyone to follow along. I don't know if that would be dance or Tai Chi, but yoga is probably the best. Because I've already started yoga, but maybe that's cheating. Okay. Valiant concluded that old age is not simply a process of decline and decay, as many younger people think. Older people often develop new skills and are often wiser and more socially adept than they were as younger adults. These elderly people are actually less prone to depression than younger people and usually do not suffer from incapacitating disease until they get their final illness. Of course, challenging mental activities will increase the likelihood that our hippocampal neurons will survive. One approach is to use tested brain exercises, such as those Merzenich developed. But life is for living and not only for doing exercises, so it is best that people also choose to do something they've always wanted to do because they will be highly motivated, which is crucial. All right. More than the sum of her parts. I feel like this was a case study. I don't know if I got much from this. Yeah, look at this. We're cruising. Oh, we got hit by a wall. Oh, look at this. All right, here we go. View of the brain integrates a non-doctrinaire version of localizationism with plasticity. The brain is divided into sectors, and in the course of development, each acquires a primary responsibility for a particular kind of mental activity. In complex activities, several sectors must interact. When we read, the meaning of a word is stored or mapped in one sector of the brain. The visual appearance of the letters is stored in another, and its sound in yet another. Each sector is bound together in a network so that when we encounter the word, we can see it, hear it, and understand it. Neurons from each sector have to be activated at the same time, co-activated, for us to see, hear it, and understand at once. So this was going back to our global neuronal workspace theory discussion, that like when we think about a concept or we think about the meaning of a pen or something, like we can't think about it as something that's stored in one part of our brain. Like we're leveraging each of these different aspects or each of these parts of our brain to facilitate that aspect of our experience that we could then like intuitively recognize. So, and it's more complex than just, there's a linguistic aspect and a auditory aspect or whatever. It's, as we pointed out in that video, they're even just with, linguistics that breaks down into a bunch of different ones, and we're only identifying these, and that's how we're seeing that they're involved in these functions. All right. Yeah, yoga. I think yoga is a ton of fun. All right, the rules for storing all this information reflect the use it or lose it principle. The more frequently we use a word, the more easily we'll find it. Even patients with brain damage to the word sector are better able to retrieve words they used frequently before the injury than those they used infrequently. Grafman believes that in any area of the brain that performs an activity such as storing words, it is the neurons in the center of that area that are most committed to the task. Those on the border are far less committed, so adjacent brain areas compete with each other to recruit those border neurons. Daily activities determine which brain area wins this competition. It's very interesting. Grafman believes that everything we know from brain scans about these boundary areas tells us that they can expand quickly within minutes to respond to our moment-by-moment needs. So yeah, this is just pointing out again that like plasticity is not just a thing that we can retrospectively look at and say, oh, that changed over time. Like it's constantly happening, constantly changing. From his research, Grafman has identified 4 kinds of plasticity. The first is map expansion, described above, which largely occurs largely at the boundaries between brain areas as a result of daily activity. The second is sensory reassignment, which occurs when one sense is blocked, as in the blind. When the visual cortex is deprived of its normal inputs, it can receive new inputs from another sense, such as touch, so sensory reassignment, which probably happens more granularly all the time, even in patterns of thinking. Like chances are when we do like top-down attention or top-down thinking, we are effectively blocking off certain aspects of our, automatic, what would otherwise be automatic processing, and therefore affecting a reassignment of something. It would be hard to tell like exactly what that reassignment is doing in the moment, how it's affecting the concepts we understand and all that. But the third is compensatory masquerade, which takes advantage of the fact that there's more than one way for your brain to approach a task. Some people use visual landmarks to get from place to place. Others with a good sense of direction have a strong spatial sense. So if they lose their spatial sense in a brain injury, they can fall back on landmarks. Until neuroplasticity was recognized, compensatory masquerade, also called compensation or alternative strategies, such as switching people with reading problems to audio tapes, was the chief method used to help children with learning disabilities. Okay. The fourth kind of plasticity is mirror region takeover. When part of one hemisphere fails, the mirror region in the opposite hemisphere adapts, taking over its mental function as best it can. Okay. Migration of mental function to the opposite hemisphere can happen because early in development our hemispheres are quite similar, and only later do they become gradually specialize. In other words, each hemisphere tends to specialize in certain functions but is not hardwired to do so. The age at which we learn a mental skill strongly influences the area in which it gets processed. As infants, we are slowly exposed to the world around us, and as we learn new skills, the most suitable processing sectors of our brains that are as yet uncommitted are the ones used to process those skills. Which means that if you take 1 million people and you look at the same areas of their brains, you will see those areas are more or less committed to performing the same functions or processes. But he adds, they may be in the exact same place, and they shouldn't be, because each of us will have different life experiences. They may not be in the exact same place. All right, let me read that again because I kind of butchered that. This goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Dharmadam, about each person's brain being different, which means that if you take 1 million people and you look at the same areas of their brains, you will see those areas more or less committed to performing the same functions or processes. They may not be in the exact same place, and they shouldn't be, because each of us will have different life experiences. So when we look at patterns of thought that might be like, as we were talking, really abstract, we would see perhaps similar processing patterns rather than seeing like the same neurons in the same location or the same configuration of neurons. Grafman's theory is that over the course of evolution, the prefrontal cortex developed the ability to capture and retain information over longer and longer periods of time, allowing human beings to develop both foresight and memory. The left frontal lobe became specialized in storing memories of individual events, and the right in extracting a theme or the main point from a series of events or from a story. So this trajectory we're now following is what allowed Damasio to come up with how we arrived at the type of self-consciousness that we have. Like, it required memory for us to be able to start conceptualizing persistent concepts like this. Foresight involves extracting the theme from a series of events before they completely unfold, and it is a great advantage in life to know that when a tiger crouches, it is preparing to attack, may help you survive. Person with foresight doesn't have to experience the entire series of events to know what is likely coming. People with right prefrontal lesions have impaired foresight. They can watch a movie, but they can't get the main point or see where the plot is going. They don't plan well, since planning involves ordering a series of events that they lead toward a desired outcome, goal, or main point. Nor do people with right frontal lesions execute their plans well. I'm sorry, this is all the same. Right frontal lesions. Unable to keep to the main point, they are easily distracted. They are often socially inappropriate because they don't get the main point of social interactions, which are also a series of events, and they have difficulty understanding metaphors and similes, which require extracting the main point or theme from various details. If a poet says a marriage is a battle zone, it is important to know that the poet doesn't mean the marriage consists of actual explosions and dead bodies. Rather, it is a husband and wife fighting intensely. Okay. In fact, people without disabilities can benefit from liberating one hemisphere from another. Betty Edwards' book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, written in 1979, years before Miller's discovery, taught people to draw by developing ways to stop the verbal, analytical left hemisphere from inhibiting the right hemisphere's artistic tendencies. Inspired by the neuroscientific research of Sperry, Edwards taught that the verbal, logical, and analytic left hemisphere perceives in ways that actually interfere with drawing and tends to overpower the right hemisphere, which is better at drawing. Edwards' primary tactic was to deactivate the left hemisphere's inhibition of the right by giving the student a task the left hemisphere would be unable to understand and so turn down. For instance, she had students draw a picture of a Picasso sketch while looking at it upside down, and they found they did a far better job than when doing it right side up. Students would develop a sudden knack for drawing rather than acquiring the skill gradually. Wow. I think that our understanding of the different hemispheres is a little more clear since this book came out. So like I don't know if we have like as simplistic of a, left brain versus right brain than we did. However, I imagine what's being said here is still pretty. The moral of what's being said, ironically enough, is still pretty apt. Am I familiar with the research of McGillichrist on the brain? I've certainly heard of this, and we might have covered this because I've definitely heard the name. And yeah, I'm not sure what was the main shtick there. All right, let's keep going. Let's power through. Since there are many thousands of brain activities going on at once, we need forces to inhibit, control, and regulate our brains in order to keep us sane, organized, and in control of ourselves so we don't ride off in all directions at once. It would seem that the most frightening thing about brain disease is that it might erase certain mental functions. But just as devastating is a brain disease that leads us to express parts of ourselves we wish didn't exist. Much of the brain is inhibitory, and when we lose that inhibition, unwanted drives and instincts emerge full force, shaming us and devastating our relationships and families. Yikes. Okay, we're cruising. Oh man, we got a big group here. Oh, this is the appendix, the culturally modified brain. Not only does the brain shape culture, culture shapes the brain. So this is a discussion that we obviously have in the document. What is the relationship between the brain and culture? The conventional answer of scientists has been that the human brain, from which all thought and action emanate, produces culture. Based on what we have learned about neuroplasticity, this answer is no longer adequate. Culture is not just produced by the brain, it is also, by definition, a series of activities that shape the mind. The Oxford Dictionary, English Dictionary, gives one important definition of culture: the cultivating or development of the mind, faculties, manners, etc., improvements or refinements by education and training, the training, development, and refinement of the mind, tastes, and manners. We become cultured through training in various activities such as customs, arts, ways of interacting with people, and the use of technologies, and the learning of ideas, beliefs, shared philosophies, and religion. Neuroplastic research has shown us that every sustained activity ever mapped, including physical activities, sensory activities, learning, thinking, and imagining, changes the brain as well as the mind. Cultural ideas and activities are no exception. Our brains are modified by the cultural activities we do, be they reading, studying music, or learning new languages. We all have what might be called a culturally modified brain, and as cultures evolved, they continually lead to new changes in the brain. As Merzenich puts it, our brains are vastly different in fine detail from the brains of our ancestors. In each stage of cultural development, the average human had to learn complex new skills and abilities that all involve massive brain changes. Each one of us can actually learn an incredibly elaborate set of ancestrally developed skills and abilities in our lifetimes, in a sense, generating a recreation of this history of cultural evolution via brain plasticity. So a neuroplastically informed view of culture and the brain implies a two-way street. The brain and genetics produce culture, but culture also shapes the brain. Sometimes these changes can be dramatic. All right, so I got a lot from the Appendix 1, the culturally modified brain. Okay. To my understanding, Ian McGillichrist believes the left hemisphere of the brain is more analytical and focuses on propositions, and the right hemisphere of the brain is more holistic and focuses on relevance. So yeah, that's what I'm referring to, where I think that might be more informed today than when he came up with that very popular view. Like, that might be too simple or too reductive. I could be wrong though. Maybe it's still going strong, and certainly people use it still. But what I'm guessing is that, like, the science has showed that there's like nuances to that view, and there might be a slightly more apt way to describe it. All right, the sea gypsies are nomadic people who live in cluster of tropical. Okay. Swedish researchers studied the sea gypsies' ability to read placards underwater and found that they were more than twice as skillful as European children. The gypsies learned to control the shape of their lenses and, more significantly, to control the size of their pupils, constricting them 22%. This is the craziest thing. So because they swim all the time, this is like the Na'vi in the second Avatar. Like these guys are different beings entirely. This is a remarkable finding because human pupils reflexively get larger underwater, and pupil adjustment has been thought to be a fixed, innate reflex controlled by the brain and nervous system. This ability of the sea gypsies to see underwater isn't the product of a unique genetic endowment. Gislin has since taught Swedish children to constrict their pupils to see underwater. One more instance of the brain and nervous system showing unexpected training effects that alter what was thought to be a hardwired, unchangeable circuit. Pretty crazy. I would like to take that class. That would be nice. I don't know why I'm going to be underwater when I'm going to use this. And I have contacts when I don't have glasses. So, probably not the best. But back, what was your response to my previous comment? The response was that I think that was what I was talking about, and I think there might be a more nuanced contemporary view in science. But certainly that's like a very popular view. I'm a Subnautica pro. There's no way water can scare me. True. Until the next Subnautica comes out, and then it's going to be scary again. That is if that dev team can actually not be immoral towards the devs and not take over the company and actually make a good game. Who knows? Who knows if that's still possible? But yeah, that was certainly tough because I think I am thalassophobic, if that's the word. Okay. Our brains stuck in the Pleistocene. What does that mean again? Pleistocene age. Epoch, that last, okay, spanning there is the last ice age. All right, let's just see what's going on here. A popular explanation of how our brain comes to perform cultural activities is proposed by evolutionary psychologists, a group of researchers who argue that all human beings share the same basic brain modules, departments in the brain, or brain hardware, and these modules develop to do specific cultural tasks, some for language, some for mating, some for classifying the world, and so on. These modules evolved in the Pleistocene age from about 1.8 million to 10,000 years ago, when humanity lived as hunter-gatherers, and the modules have been passed on essentially unchanged genetically. Because we all share these modules, key aspects of human nature and psychology are fairly universal. Then, in an addendum, these psychologists note that the adult human brain is therefore anatomically unchanged since the Pleistocene. Pleistocene? This addendum goes too far because it doesn't take plasticity, also part of our genetic heritage, into account. The hunter-gatherer brain was as plastic as our own, and it was not stuck in the Pleistocene at all, but rather was able to reorganize its structure and functions in order to respond to changing conditions. In fact, it was that ability to modify itself that enabled us to emerge from the Pleistocene, a process that has been called cognitive fluidity by the archaeologist Mithin, and that I would argue probably has its basis in brain plasticity. All our brain modules are plastic to some degree and can be combined and differentiated over the course of our individual lives to perform a number of functions. As in the experiment in which the blindfolded people demonstrated that their occipital lobe, which normally processes vision, could process sound and touch. Modular change is necessary for adaptation to the modern world, which exposes us to things our hunter-gatherer ancestors never had to contend with. An fMRI study shows that we recognize cars and trucks with the same brain module we use to recognize faces. Clearly, the hunter-gatherer brain did not evolve to recognize cars and trucks. It is likely that the face module was most competitively suited to process these shapes. Headlights are sufficiently like eyes, the hood like a nose, the grill like a mouth, so that the brain, the plastic brain, with a little training and structural alteration, could process a car with the facial recognition system. The many brain modules a child must use for reading, writing, and computer work evolved millennia before literacy, which is only several thousand years old. Literacy's spread has been so rapid that the brain could not have evolved a genetically based module specifically for reading. Literacy, after all, can be taught to illiterate hunter-gatherer tribes in a single generation, and there is no way the whole tribe could develop a gene for a reading module in that time. Okay. As Merzenich and Talal learned, it is possible to see reading circuits on brain scans. Thus, signature cultural activities give rise to signature brain circuits that did not exist in our ancestors. According to Merzenich, our brains are different from those of all humans before us. Our brain is modified on a substantial scale, physically and functionally, each time we learn a new skill and develop a new ability. Massive changes are associated with our modern cultural specializations. And though not everyone uses the same brain areas to read because the brain is plastic, there are typical circuits for reading, physical evidence that cultural activity leads to modified brain structures. All right, why human beings become the preeminent bearers of culture. The Human Genome Project enabled scientists to determine precisely which genes differed, and it turns out that one of them is a gene that determines how many neurons we will make. Our neurons are basically identical to those of chimps and even of marine snails. In the embryo, all our neurons start from a single cell, which divides and makes 2, then 4, then so on. A regulatory gene determines when the process of division will stop, and it is this gene that differs between humans and chimps. This is what was changed in Planet of the Apes. This is what's happening here. That process goes on for enough rounds until human beings have about 100 billion neurons. It stops a few rounds earlier in chimps, so they have a brain 1/3 the size of our own. Chimpanzee brains are plastic, but the sheer quantitative difference between ours and theirs leads to an exponentially greater number of interactions between them, because each neuron can be connected to thousands of cells. All right. Okay. A non-Darwinian way to alter biological structures, but plasticity creates a new way beyond genetic mutation and variation of introducing new biological brain structures in individuals by non-Darwinian means. When a parent reads, the microscopic structure of his or her brain, her own brain, is changed. Reading can be taught to children, and it changes the biological structure of their brains. The brain is changed in 2 ways. The fine details of the circuits connecting the modules are altered, no small matter, but so are the original hunter-gatherer brain modules themselves, because in the plastic brain, change in one area or brain function flows through the brain, typically altering the modules that are connected to it. All right, plasticity and sublimation, how we civilize our animal instincts. This principle that modules working together modify each other may even help explain how it is possible for us to mix together brute, predatory, and dominance instincts processed by instinctual modules with our more cognitive cerebral tendencies processed by intelligence modules, as we do in sports or competitive games such as chess or in artistic competitions, to come up with activities that express both the instinctual and the intellectual in one activity. An activity of this kind is called a sublimation, a hitherto mysterious process by which brute animal instincts are civilized. How sublimation occurs has always been a riddle. Clearly, much of parenting involves civilizing children by teaching them to restrain or channel these instincts into acceptable expressions, such as in contact sports, board and computer games, theater, literature, and art. In aggressive sports such as football, hockey, boxing, and soccer, fans often express these brute wishes: kill him, flatten him, eat him alive, and so on. But the civilizing rules modify the expression of the instinct, so the fans leave satisfied if their team wins enough points. All right, the ideal solution was to express these instincts in ways that were acceptable and even rewarded by our fellow humans, which was possible because the instincts, being plastic, could change their aim. He called this process sublimation, yet as he conceded, he never really explained exactly how an instinct might be transformed into something more cerebral. The plastic brain solves the riddle of sublimation. Areas that evolved to perform hunter-gatherer tasks such as stalking prey can, because they are plastic, be sublimated into competitive games, since our brains evolved to link different neuronal groups and modules in novel ways. There is no reason why neurons from the instinctual parts of our brains cannot be linked to our more cognitive cerebral ones and to our pleasure centers, so that they literally get wired together to form new wholes. These wholes are more than and different from the sum of their parts. Recall that Merzenich and Pascual Leon argued that a fundamental rule of brain plasticity is that when 2 areas begin to interact, they influence each other and form a new whole. When an instinct, such as stalking prey, is linked up to a civilized activity, such as cornering the opponent's king on a chessboard, and the neuronal networks for the instinct and the intellectual activity are also linked, the 2 activities appear to temper each other. Playing chess is no longer about bloodthirsty stalking, though it still has some of the exciting emotions of the hunt. The dichotomy between low instinctual and high cerebral begins to disappear. Whenever the low and high transform each other to create a new whole, we can call it sublimation. Right? And you can imagine, like, you're playing a game, whether that is League of Legends or Call of Duty or Counter-Strike or whatever, and you are the last one alive and you have to do some crazy play. You can imagine that you are experiencing emotions that perhaps people experienced in war or experienced when defending from a predator or whatnot. Like these experiences are very similar in the emotions that are transpiring. Yeah. Granted, perhaps maybe not at the same level. Like perhaps we do still understand that when we're playing like Call of Duty, that our life isn't on the line. So we wouldn't. Our brain isn't going to throw everything it has at us. That being said, this past year I had I was honored and tasked with being the best man at my brother's wedding, and I had to read the best man's speech, and I did a good job, but after that speech, I had so much adrenaline rushing through my brain that I had to sit down and decompress for like 30 minutes. It was like a problem. It was so much adrenaline that like I don't remember the last time I've experienced that much adrenaline. We must read Wittgenstein. What is Wittgenstein? I guess I still want to know, what does Wittgenstein offer that we haven't already gotten, other than his semantic rule set here? Because I think I would agree with Wittgenstein on like a lot of the pragmatic stuff, but I feel like I've come up with like an intuitive way to talk about this stuff that is connected to the actual science. All right, civilization is a series of techniques in which the hunter-gatherer brain teaches itself to rewire itself. And the sad proof that civilization is a composite of the higher and lower brain functions is seen when civilization breaks down in civil wars and brutal instincts emerge full force, and theft, rape, destruction, and murder become commonplace, because the plastic brain can always allow brain functions that it has brought together to separate. Because the plastic brain can always allow brain functions that it has brought together to separate, a regression to barbarism is always possible, and civilization will always be a tenuous affair that must be taught in each generation and is always at most one generation deep. Right? So yeah, going with our previous conversation that we had, like, just because we've lived an entire life in peacetime does not mean that we should forget that things can go south easily. They've gone south in the past 100 years. They can go south again. So, in parts of the world, they are currently south. So we got to just be mindful that stuff can come here, or here as in wherever you are. Wittgenstein doesn't offer anything, but generally we must read him. Okay. And Kierkegaard, because Wittgenstein called him a saint. Well, that seems pretty compelling. Did Kierkegaard do fiction? Or was that also nonfiction? All right, when the brain is caught between two cultures, immigration is hard on the plastic brain. The process of learning acculturation, is an additive experience of learning new things and making new neuronal connections as we acquire culture. Additive plasticity occurs when brain change involves growth, but plasticity is also subtractive and can involve taking things away, as occurs when the adolescent brain prunes away neurons and when neuronal connections not being used are lost. Each time the plastic brain acquires culture and uses it repeatedly, there is an opportunity cost. The brain loses some neural structure in the process because plasticity is competitive. So yeah, that's always the concern. Like, if I were to learn French right now, what am I going to lose? All right. Patricia Kuhl of the University of Washington in Seattle has done brainwave studies that show that human infants are capable of hearing any sound distinction in all the thousands of languages of our species. But once the critical period of auditory cortex development closes, an infant reared in a single culture loses the capacity to hear many of these sounds, and unused neurons are pruned away until the brain map is dominated by the language of its culture. That is me. Now its brain filters out thousands of sounds. A Japanese 6-month-old can hear the English RL distinction as well as an American infant. At 1 year, she no longer can. Should that child later immigrate, She will have difficulty hearing and speaking new sounds properly. Immigration is usually an unending, brutal workout for the adult brain, requiring a massive rewiring of vast amounts of our cortical real estate. It is a far more difficult matter than simply learning new things, because the new culture is in plastic competition with neural networks that had their critical period of development in the native land. Successful assimilation, with few exceptions, requires at least a generation. Only immigrant children who pass through their critical periods in the new culture can hope to find immigration less disorienting and traumatizing. For most, culture shock is brain shock. Cultural differences are so persistent because when our native culture is learned and wired into our brains, it becomes second nature, seemingly as natural as many of the instincts we were born with. The tastes our culture creates in foods, in types of family and love and music often seem natural, even though they may be acquired tastes. The way we conduct, so this is just a lesson in empathy right here, right? Like we can imagine that we feel like what we know to be true and right is right, and we think that the tastes that we know to be true and the tastes that we know to be good or bad are like static for everyone. It's like we're not even dealing with the same tastes that other people are dealing with. So, yeah. Okay, the ways we conduct nonverbal communication, how close we stand to other people, the rhythms and volume of our speech, how long we wait before interrupting a conversation, all seem natural to us because they are so deeply wired into our brains. When we change cultures, we are shocked to learn that these customs are not natural at all. Indeed, even when we make a modest change, such as moving to a new house, we discover that something as basic as our sense of space, which seems so natural to us, and numerous routines we were not even aware we had, must slowly be altered while the brain rewires itself. All right, sensing and perceiving are plastic. So this is all the stuff that's like really hammering home the topics we've been talking about for the past year and a half. Much longer? Until we get to the bottom of this page right now. So I'm going to keep booking through. I don't think we can go into any tangents at this point. We're nearing the point where my transcription script is not going to be able to do this whole stream in one go. All right, Kierkegaard wrote a lot. It depends on how you look at pseudonymous writings and use of characters in his writing to decide whether they're fiction or not. Okay, but it's in theory fiction, but it could be nonfiction. Okay. It has been long assumed that we absorb culture through universally shared standard issue human perceptual equipment, but perceptual learning shows that this assumption is not completely accurate. To a larger degree than we suspected, culture determines what we can and cannot perceive. One of the first people to begin thinking about how plasticity must change the way we think about culture was the Canadian cognitive neuroscientist Merlin Donald, who argued in 2000 that culture changes our functional cognitive architecture, meaning that, as with learning to read and write, mental functions are reorganized. We now know that for this to happen, anatomical structures must change too. Donald also argued that complex cultural activities like literacy and language change brain functions, but our most basic brain functions, such as vision and memory, are not altered. As he put it, no one suggests that culture determines anything fundamental about vision or basic memory capacity. However, this is obviously not true of the functional architecture of literacy and probably not of language. Wow. All right, the most famous European psychologist of the mid-20th century, Jean Piaget, believed he showed in a series of brilliant experiments on European children that perceiving and reasoning unfold in development in the same way for all humans, and that these processes are universal. True, scholars, travelers, and anthropologists had long observed that the peoples of the East, those Asian peoples influenced by Chinese traditions, and those of the West, the heirs to the traditions of the ancient Greeks, perceive in different ways, but scientists assumed these differences were based on different interpretations of what was seen, not on microscopic differences in their perceptual equipment and structures. For instance, it was often observed that Westerners approach the world analytically, dividing what they observe into individual parts. Easterners tend to approach the world more holistically, perceiving by looking at the whole and emphasizing the interrelatedness of all things. It was also observed that the differing cognitive styles of the analytic West and the holistic East parallel differences between the brain's two hemispheres. The left hemisphere tends to perform more sequential and analytical processing, while the right hemisphere is often engaged in simultaneous and holistic processing. Were these different ways of seeing the world based on different interpretations of what we're seeing, or were they actually seeing different things? The answer was unclear. All right, where are we at now, though? These experiments and many others like them confirm that Easterners perceive holistically, viewing objects as they are related to each other or in a context, whereas Westerners perceive them in isolation. Easterners see through a wide-angle lens. Westerners use a narrow one with a sharper focus. Everything we know about plasticity suggests that these different ways of perceiving, repeated hundreds of times a day in mass practice, must lead to changes in neural networks responsible for sensing and perceiving. High-resolution brain scans of Easterners and Westerners sensing and perceiving could likely settle the matter. So without going into a whole tangent on the stuff that we talked about earlier, this stream, like this type of discussion where we're really going into how neuroplasticity changes how we perceive the world. Like this is what makes it very intuitive for me to understand that what everyone believes to be true, what they feel to be objectively true, is ultimately subjective, yet because of our culture and because of our social encounters, these end up being pragmatically similar in populations, right? Like in subpopulations. Now that could be, you know, like a population for people that play a certain video game online. They understand things in a certain way, or they might see things in certain ways. That could differ from the population of your you know, your family's ethnicity and the cultures that come with that, and like different aspects of culture can you know, lead to thinking about things in certain ways that are specific to those, and you know, we're an amalgamation of all those different facets. But yeah, this is like we can't think about. Like, so if everyone's got these separate experiences, these subjective experiences that do come to be similar, but we could see how they pragmatically come to be similar. What do we make of these Platonic ideas of external truths that are separate from us? Where do they exist? What are they? And like you'd have to incorporate some sort of panpsychism, or you'd have to incorporate some unaccounted for thing that we don't see in the brain currently that makes sense of some dictate that isn't something that we know to exist, like specifically our brains, the neural structures in our brains, the constraints that affect the changes of our brains, whether that be social or physical. Like this is very clear cut in terms of what we're allowed to believe right now, given what we know from the science. It could be possible that there's something we haven't accounted for yet. So this isn't a saying like we know for sure that this telling is right. It's that we know for sure that that this telling is like the most appropriate we could come up with, given what we know, given all these things. All right. I think I'm I don't know if I'm gonna do raids unless I know the person. I think that would be, I think that's just gonna be a standard I follow. What is Western and Eastern here? Is the Philippines, which is culturally very Catholic, Western or Eastern? I don't know how people usually use the describe the separate the Western and Eastern. Remember we talked about that, like the weird perspective or something like that. Was it weird perspective? No, not weird. Okay, weird. What was it? It was weird. European. No, what was the weird? Did I get there by doing this? Weird countries. Is this how I get there? Often, yeah, those strict, isolated cultures or strange political situations. Okay, nope, this is not what we're looking for. This is this is the AI saying what weird countries are. Weird societies. This is what we're looking for. Weird societies. Oh, here we go. Oh, so they're ranking a weirdness rank. So Australia, United States. Okay, maybe this is a different thing. What's going on here? What makes a country weird? All right, this is not what we were talking about. Never mind. What I'm looking for is Western. What was E? European industrial? No. I don't know. I don't remember. I forget. I've came up with like a good search term last time that allowed us to get it. Also, why is this up here? When did we get here? Why do we have this atlas up? All right. A recommendation related to that, related to the Western individualist. All right, that's probably it. Western, European, individualist. What would be R? Republic? Democracy? Countries. Is anyone gonna show us the weird? No, is this not that big? It's only big enough to show up in 2 studies that we've read. All right. What if, was it Hofstede? I feel like that. There we go. Western educated. Oh, I did European. Western educated, industrialized. Oh, I was right about that one. Rich, democratic societies. Okay, so yeah, this came up specifically with the issues with psychology studies. How a lot of these studies use essentially convenience samples from these societies and thus aren't accounting for variables for that variable, let's just say, but for many variables that are related to that. So like what would other societies that have significantly different cultures, how would they react in these types of things? So a lot of these psychology studies come away with a conclusion about human behavior when really they're coming away with a conclusion about behavior for this culture. All right. What you're asking, what is the? Oh man, do you mind saving that for another day? I don't know where to put that, and also we can't do it right now because we just have to move through these last things. Okay. Further experiments by Nisbet's team confirmed that when people change cultures, they learn to perceive in a new way. After several years in America, the Japanese begin to perceive in a way indistinguishable from Americans. So clearly the perceptual differences are not based on genetics. The children of Asian American immigrants perceive in a way that reflects both cultures because they are subject to Eastern influences at home and Western influences at school and elsewhere. They sometimes process scenes holistically, and sometimes they focus on prominent objects. Other studies show that people raised in a bicultural situation actually alternate between Western and Eastern perception. Hong Kongers, having lived under both a British and a Chinese influence, can be primed to perceive in either Eastern or Western fashion by experiments showing them a Western image of Mickey Mouse or the U.S. Capitol, or an Eastern image of a temple or a dragon. Nisbet and his colleagues are thus doing the first experiments that demonstrate cross-cultural perceptual learning. Culture can influence the development of perceptual learning because perception is not, as many assume, a passive bottom-up process that begins with when energy in the outside world strikes the sense receptors, then passes signals to the higher perceptual centers in the brain. Right? We're not just This is why I point out we're not just perceiving the world directly, the physical world directly. Now, granted, predictive processing gives us a better discussion of this than what it's about to say right now, but yeah, like there's a lot going on. We're expecting and what we're perceiving is actually like modulating these expectations and the experience accordingly. It's not that we're like filtering. It's not like external stimuli comes in, then we filter it, and then we experience that what was filtered. I mean, I guess you could think about that, like our predictive processing in a filtering way, but I think the point's there. The perceiving brain is active and always adjusting itself. Seeing is as active as touching when we run our fingers over an object to discover its texture and shape. Indeed. Yo, Candy Splash Pink, welcome. Thank you for the follow. I apologize for my my quick reading right now. I'm just trying to get through this because we are 3 hours and 30 minutes in. I usually go for about 2 hours. But this isn't the first time I've done speedy reading on stream, so. All right, seeing is as active as touching when we run our fingers over an object to discover its texture and shape. Indeed, the stationary eye is virtually incapable of perceiving a complex object. Both our sensory and our motor cortices are always involved in perceiving, right? So yeah, the stationary eye thing is like we actually perceive by the rapid movement of our eye. That allows us to actually. I don't know enough about these organs to know what that's actually doing, but it's important for some reason. And also obviously focusing our eye and also moving our eye around to different things to get a sense of what's going on, and also a sense of what should be happening and what we should be doing and what we should be thinking. All right, the neuroscientists Fal and Poggio have shown experimentally that higher levels of perception affect how neuroplastic change in the lower sensory parts of the brain develops. Okay. Neuroplastic and social rigidity. Psychiatrist and researcher from Yale argues in his book Brain and Culture that the relative decline in neuroplasticity as we age explains many social phenomena. In childhood, our brains readily shape themselves in response to the world, developing neuropsychological structures which include our pictures or representations of the world. These structures form the neuronal basis for all our perceptual habits and beliefs, all the way up to complex ideologies. Like all plastic phenomena, these structures tend to get reinforced early on, if repeated, and become self-sustaining. As we age and plasticity declines, it becomes increasingly difficult for us to change in response to the world, even if we want to. We find familiar types of stimulation pleasurable. We seek out like-minded individuals to associate with, and research shows we tend to ignore or forget or attempt to discredit information that does not match our beliefs or perceptions of the world, because it is very distressing and difficult to think and perceive in unfamiliar ways. So this is the huge reminder that we have to point out in part 2, in like the introductory sections where we're pointing out the biases that we have, and the fact that we some of these biases are literally related to how we think about things, how we understand the world. And so when you consider that, I mean, two things. One, you might consider that there's a way that you think about the world that you might not want to think about the world in that way. That's not a great sentence, but so what can you do about that? And then also, when considering like the times when you think that you are right about something, consider that you might be predisposed by some or disposed in this sense to think about what you're thinking about in a certain way, rather than that the way that you're thinking about it is right in some fundamental, objective, absolute way. So when it gets to really complex things like politics or spirituality or whatever, we got to keep an open mind that we might be predisposed to experience the world in these ways because of our culture, our past, and whatnot, and we have to always be open to the possibility that we might be missing something, or that something that we understand is maladaptive in some way. Increasingly, the age, and we have to be open to this distressing experience of actually changing that. Even just the idea of that we might be wrong about something, is something that is first distressing, but we can hone that and learn to be more comfortable with that type of uncertainty, which is as we've discussed in our notes for part 2 so far, is a skill that is generally beneficial for our emotional regulation. All right, increasingly, the aging individual acts to preserve the structures within, and when there is a mismatch between his internal neurocognitive structures and the world, they seek to change the world. In small ways, they begin to micromanage the environment to control it and make it familiar. But so this is the difference between active perception and active inference. So with active inference, you actually act on the world to actually like have it align with your predictions, and then one is to internalize what you're seeing as new information to make it it's just the aspect of incorporating what you're seeing into your models now. Exactly, this is important to understand in order to understand Wittgenstein and the others. Hey, we got another Wittgenstein advocate. I think we're all children of Wittgenstein in some sense, despite the fact that I haven't read him yet. I come from Brandom, who I think is quite influenced by Wittgenstein. So, but this process writ large often leads whole cultural groups to try to impose their view of the world on other cultures, and they often become violent, especially in the modern world, where globalization has brought different cultures closer together, exacerbating the problem. Wexler's point, then, is that much of the cross-cultural conflict we see is a product of the relative decrease in plasticity. All right. How many American soldiers were killed by each of them if they all killed an equal number of enemy soldiers? Such perceptual emotional networks, once established in an indoctrinated people, do not lead only to mere differences of opinion between them and their adversaries, but to plasticity-based anatomical differences, which are much harder to bridge or overcome with ordinary persuasion. Right, so when we're thinking about persuasion, we have to realize that it's not like always a set of reasons will get someone from one point of view to another. It's not like that's how our thoughts work. It's not like we're always just like on some objective ground and we can just go from one objective ground to another with thoughts. Like really at the end of the day, what we're dealing with is experiences and emotions. So what leads someone to change their mind is experiences that are emotionally salient enough, and those could be hearing reasons, but experiences that are emotionally salient enough for the brain to change in such a way where you end up thinking, oh, this is compelling. I was wrong. All right, Wexler's emphasis is on the relative tapering off of plasticity as we age, but it must be said that certain practices used by cults or in brainwashing, which obey the laws of neuroplasticity, demonstrate that sometimes individual identities can be changed in adulthood, even against a person's will. Human beings can be broken down and then develop, or at least add on, neurocognitive structures if their daily lives can be totally controlled and they can be conditioned by reward and severe punishment and subjected to massed practice, where they are forced to repeat or mentally rehearse various ideological statements. So any way you go in this direction, you're going to find some like absolutely terrible stuff. But this is like a thing that we found in many cases. In some cases, this process can actually lead them to unlearn their pre-existing mental structures, as Walter Freeman has observed. These unpleasant outcomes would not be possible if the adult brain were not plastic. The media, how the media reorganize it. The Harvard psychologist Hallowell, an expert on attention deficit disorder, so this is, you could see the book's old age, which is genetic, has linked the electronic media to the rise of attention deficit traits, which are not genetic in much of the population. Wow, 20 years ago, this is almost, it's funny how what they must have thought about what's, how this is going to affect ADHD and how it's being affected now. It's probably like a scale of 20. Most people think that the dangers created by the media are a result of content, but McLuhan, the Canadian who founded media studies in the 1950s and predicted the internet 20 years before it was invented, was the first to intuit that the media change our brains irrespective of content, and he famously said, "The medium is the message." So this is the medium is the message guy. McLuhan was arguing that each medium reorganizes our mind and brain in its own unique way, and that the consequences of these reorganizations are far more significant than the effects of the content or message. I mean, yeah, this is almost like a who cares, because they both affect. Like imagine just like political content, like it's both propaganda, indoctrination, and it's also affecting your dopamine tolerance in such a way that you want more. You want more of that. You want to feel it. All right, Michael and Just of Carnegie Mellon did a brain scan study to test whether the medium is indeed the message. They showed that different brain areas are involved in hearing speech and reading it, and different comprehension centers in reading words and reading them. As Just put it, the brain constructs the message different for reading and listening. The pragmatic implication is that the medium is part of the message. Listening to an audiobook leaves a different set of memories than reading does. A newscast heard on the radio is processed differently from the same words read in a newspaper. Right, but I want to see what's different about TikTok versus like YouTube, which of course they couldn't even fathom at this time. But this finding refutes the conventional theory of comprehension, which argues that a single brain center in the brain understands words, and it doesn't really matter how, by what sense or medium, information enters the brain, because it will be processed in the same way and place. Michael and Just's experiments show that each medium creates a different sensory and semantic experience, and we might add develops different circuits in the brain. All right, we're cruising. Plasticity and the idea of progress. Perfectibilite, the mixed blessing. While we may rejoice at the thought that the brain and human nature may be improved, the idea of human perfectibility or plasticity stirs up a hornet's nest of moral problems. Earlier thinkers, going back to Aristotle, who did not speak of a plastic brain, argue that there was an obvious ideal or perfect mental development. Our mental and emotional faculties were provided by nature, and a healthy mental development was achieved by using those faculties and perfecting them. Rousseau understood that if human mental and emotional life and the brain are malleable, we can no longer be so certain what a normal or perfect mental development would look like. There could be many different kinds of development. Perfectibility means that we can no longer be so certain about what it meant to perfect ourselves. Realizing this moral problem, Rousseau used the term perfectibility in an ironic sense. Oof. Because unfortunately, the downstream is morality. So we have to obviously have that careful discussion when we get to part 3. We must speak carefully clinically, too, as we speak of brain plasticity, not to fall into blaming those who, despite this new science, cannot benefit or change. Clearly, neuroplasticity teaches that the brain is more malleable than some have thought, but to move from calling it malleable to calling it perfectible raises expectations to a dangerous level. The plastic paradox teaches that neuroplasticity can also be responsible for many rigid behaviors and even some pathologies, along with all the potential flexibility that is within us. As the idea of plasticity becomes the focus of human attention in our time, we would be wise to remember that it is a phenomenon that produces effects we think of both good and bad, rigidity and flexibility, vulnerability, and an unexpected resourcefulness. Also, yeah, now that this like throws a wrench in the idea of there being an objective truth at some low level, it starts to become ambiguous as to what it would mean to be perfect. What are we perfecting in our changing our brain, right? So like in our document, we're always focused on the overarching goal of achieving a life that feels rewarding or emotionally rewarding, meaningful, fulfilling. Like that's the North Star that's guiding us. So all this stuff that we're talking about, being able to achieve, identify and achieve our goals, that's all in that service. So like for us, we get to have the benefit of not perfect something that's perfect, but a direction, like how we would want to affect our brains. But it's still open-ended. Like this is still going to be very much open-ended in part 2 to say, like, first of all, which of these techniques works for you given your individual circumstances, and what you're the one who gets to identify your goals, and Yeah. So we keep it pretty abstract, but we give the tools for going after any of them. All right, final paragraph. Here we go. Out of water. We got to do it. We got to do it. We'll do it live. What we have learned by looking closely at neuroplasticity and the plastic paradox is that human neuroplasticity contributes to both the constrained and unconstrained aspects of our nature. Thus, while it is true that the history of Western political thought turns in large part upon the attitudes that various ages and thinkers have held toward the question of human plasticity, broadly understood, the elucidation of human neuroplasticity in our time, if carefully thought through, shows that plasticity is far too subtle a phenomenon to unambiguously support a more constrained or unconstrained view of human nature, because in fact it contributes to both human rigidity and flexibility, depending upon how it is cultivated. So yeah, we have to cultivate this now. That's what we're given. Tomorrow I'm gonna read through a article from an embodied cognition book, what I've been reading, the Routledge Handbook of Embodied Cognition, that specifically goes over like ways of thinking as habits, and which like goes right in line with what we just talked about now. And I was blown away. I was very excited because I haven't heard anyone else talk about these types of ways of thinking about the world and thoughts as habitual and procedural in that way. I've been looking for someone to think in that way, and so we gotta not only read that, but then I gotta find who they're referencing and who's referencing them, and what else they've been doing since I think since they wrote that stuff. So I'm quite excited for tomorrow. All right, we got to do a quick goodbye. I got to get out of here. Thank you everyone for chilling out and hearing me machine gun words at you. Thank you for the discussion as well. It was a lot of fun, and have a good rest of the day.